Nightmares of Caitlin Lockyer by Demelza Carlton. 1. They took her away from me. I mumbled a protest through the haze of pain and exhaustion that had turned me into little more than a zombie. I'll never be able to watch a zombie movie again without remembering this night, I thought. It's all right, we have to move her somewhere else to take care of her. She's hurt worse than you, I was told. We need to treat you too. There's a gunshot wound in your shoulder. I couldn't remember how long it had been since I'd last slept, so it took a few seconds to register what she'd said. Gunshot wound. My shoulder. Oh yeah, it hurt. I couldn't help her till that was sorted. Hospital staff would take care of her until I was okay. The pain began to dull as a local anesthetic took effect. I turned to look at the mess of blood my right shoulder had become. The smell of disinfectant jolted my brain out of sleep and most of the way to alertness. All that blood, and it was barely more than a graze. A few stitches would sort that. One of the hospital staff held a clipboard while she spoke to two police officers just out of earshot. She nodded, looked grim, and came over. She started firing questions at me. Name? Nathan Miller. What happened? I was shot. By whom? A homicidal lunatic with a gun and bad aim. The next question came tersely. Her name? Caitlin Lockyer. What happened to her? Looks like someone tried to kill her. Was that you? No, it was the homicidal lunatic and his mates for all I know. What's your relationship to her? Friend? What the hell, I thought. She'd probably agree with that, for the moment at least. There. Done. The nurse stitching up my shoulder was cheerful, glad to be finished with me. Now I'll show you to your room just overnight. I want to see her. She's still in emergency. I want to see her, I repeated. Only family are allowed. She's in a critical condition. Which is why I want to see her. But you can't. Take me to where she is now. Nurse Grimm was reluctant, but Caitlin wasn't that far away. Instead of a normal emergency department curtained cubicle, they'd put her in the room for child patients, with cheerful pictures and mobiles on the ceiling. Small though she was, I hadn't made the mistake of thinking she was a child. Nurse Grimm stopped to speak in a low voice to an orderly outside. I accosted a nurse on her way out of Caitlin's room. How is she? She's fighting us. Calls out for someone and tries to get up. We can't do anything for her unless she calms down. I glanced inside and saw someone with a syringe advancing on her. Please don't hurt her. I blurted out. The orderly blocked my path. You're not family. I'm the one she's calling for. You said your name was Nathan Miller and… But she doesn't know that. I pushed past him. The syringe-wielding nurse stared at me, her mouth open. Caitlin struggled to sit up and grabbed the syringe from the distracted nurse. Don't let them hurt me again. For an instant I saw her face. Her eyes had hell in them. I approached her slowly, looking deep into her tortured eyes, avoiding looking at the injuries that caused her so much pain. I'm here. We're in a hospital and they're trying to help you. I kept my voice calm and steady. She sagged back against the bed as she took this in, her eyes never leaving mine. The syringe rolled across the floor as it slipped from her fingers. So tired, she managed to say, but scared to sleep. What if I wake up, you're gone, and I'm still there with them? She didn't look away, even as her eyes filled with tears. Please? I'll be here. When you wake up, I'll be here. Here in hospital with you, I promised recklessly, forcing myself to smile as I reached to touch her hair. Thank you, she murmured, closing her eyes. I waited until I was sure she was asleep before I said anything else. You cut her hair off. She won't like that. Her long hair was now a short, dark cap that curled slightly around her ears. "She didn't," came the nurse's voice behind me. "That must have been what woke her up. But we couldn't leave it, it was matted with blood and sand. We had to clean the wounds on her back. I've never seen so many ulcers, especially ones that bad. It's a good thing she's unconscious for this, because those must really hurt." She talked as she worked. I tried to keep my eyes firmly fixed on Caitlin's sleeping face so I didn't see the extent of her injuries, but occasionally my eyes would stray to the subject of the nurse's running commentary. Every time I wanted to close my eyes in horror at the thought of what Caitlin had been through, but I didn't. Instead, I dragged my eyes back to her face. When the nurse had finished with her now cooperative patient, she said, "Now I'm taking her up to her room." "And I'm taking you to yours," an orderly behind me chimed in. "If you think you're taking us to separate rooms, you've got another thing coming. The police want you under guard. And she won't feel safe without some sort of protection. We'll share." As they wheeled her bed out, I followed, along with a police officer I hadn't noticed earlier. "Can I have a word with you?" he asked abruptly. I shrugged. My eyes were on Caitlin, asleep on the hospital bed. "Look, you found an injured girl on a beach and got her to hospital, probably saving her life. That sort of thing can get you a medal. But there are a few suspicious things that just don't add up. You were walking down a beach in winter at 2 a.m. You got into the ambulance with her. She refused all medical assistance until you were there. There was a dead body on the beach not far from where you found her, shot with the gun you were holding. And she was last seen 3 weeks ago, speaking to someone in a car just like yours." I shrugged again. "Look, I've already told 2 different officers this, but I can tell you 2 if you like. I couldn't sleep, so I went for a drive, then decided to take a walk on the beach. I saw a couple going for it near where I'd parked my car when I got back, so I decided to take a longer walk and come back a bit later. When I returned later, they were still there and I tried to keep my distance from them, but I heard her telling him to stop. When I gathered he wasn't stopping and she was getting increasingly upset about it, I went over and asked if they were all right. She asked me to help her and the guy told me to fuck off. He pulled a gun out and started waving it around and threatening me. I dived for the gun and got into a fight with him. I managed to knock the gun out of his hands and I didn't see where it landed. The next thing I knew, there were gunshots and I threw myself to the ground, but he didn't. She'd gotten hold of the gun and shot him. I'm lucky she didn't hit me, her aim was so bad. I told her that he wasn't going to hurt her again and tried to take the gun off her, but she wouldn't let go until I promised they wouldn't hurt her again. So I did. I took a deep breath and went on. I rang an ambulance and waited with her. The police turned up, someone got mixed up and figured I was the one responsible, possibly because I was holding the gun. They let me carry her to the ambulance. Then one of your guys shot me, or tried to, but he only grazed me and managed to shoot her instead. The last thing she said before she passed out was, "You promised." I gritted my teeth, remembering what she'd looked like as she said it. I got in the ambulance because I was carrying her, I stayed because I'd been shot and I'd promised. She's been beaten and worse by the dead guy, then when I tried to help her we both got shot by the police who were supposedly trying to help her. About the only person who hasn't hurt her is me, so she doesn't trust anyone else. Damn it, your guys shot her. And yes, I'm staying. I found some random girl on a beach, fought off her attacker and helped to get her to hospital, while getting shot in the process and winding up in hospital myself. So I'm sticking around because I want to know she's okay. If you were in my place, I imagine you'd want to know whether you'd wasted your time too. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. He looked unmoved. You have no witnesses to confirm your story before the police showed up? Anyone you told you were going for a walk? Anyone who saw you? I nodded toward Caitlin. She saw me. After thinking a moment, I added, my doctor knows I have trouble sleeping. He gave me something called Demelza, but I only use it as a last resort. And how do you explain that your car was seen when she disappeared? I narrowed my eyes. My car? I drive a red Mercedes. I know it's an unusual car, but I bet it's not the only one in Perth. You know it was my car? Someone saw the license plates of my car? The cop looked abashed. Okay, no, we don't know what the number plate was. We don't know it was your car. But it is a hell of a coincidence all the same. I took a deep breath and laughed. Look mate, do you think she'd trust me if I was the guy who'd raped her? More soberly, I continued, hell of a coincidence, more like someone's trying to set me up for this. He looked indecisive for a moment before replying in a low voice, if someone's trying to set you up, they'll need to set you up with accomplices. Her medical report says that she's been raped repeatedly by at least 4 of them, probably including the dead one on the beach. And judging by her injuries, they've been at it for at least a couple of weeks. 3 of them are still out there. When she wakes up, she might be able to tell us who they are. But I never told you. 2. Red Mercedes. They had a red Mercedes. Hit me, pulled me in, drugged me. Eyes like saucers. Pervert. Sorry. Oh God, so sorry. Let me go, you bastard. Fighting the drugs. Clawing at my throat. Fighting the darkness. The pain in the darkness. Fight them. Don't let them win. 3. I woke in daylight and glanced at my watch. Early afternoon. My shoulder ached and more besides. It must have been time for more pain medication. Please, please let there be more pain medication. A smiling woman set a tray of lunch on the table next to my bed. She returned to the trolley for Caitlin's lunch, which she placed hesitantly on the table beside her. One of the volunteers should be along shortly, with the book and magazine trolley. Your roommate's on the front cover of today's paper, you might want to keep a copy for her. I thanked the woman. When she wakes up, can you tell her I've given her today's and tomorrow's menu, so she can pick what she wants? Yours is on your tray too. She lowered her voice. The ice cream is really good. I smiled and thanked her again as she left, my eyes straying to Caitlin. I slid out of bed and made my way over to her. She was tucked tightly in her bed, still asleep, her face and hair all that showed. She looked as if she hadn't moved since we were brought here early this morning. With the amount of sedative she'd been given last night, she wasn't going to be awake for lunch today, nor dinner. I figured her first hospital meal wouldn't be earlier than breakfast tomorrow. I had until then to work out what I wanted to say to her when she woke up. I headed past her to the bathroom we shared, before I went back to sit on my bed to eat lunch for breakfast at lunchtime. I didn't taste any of it from the first bite till I'd finished the ice cream. When did I last eat? I wondered, realizing that I couldn't remember. No wonder I'd been hungry. I'd last had a drink more than 12 hours ago, a sip on the beach, before I gave the rest of the can to Caitlin. Almost without thinking, I pushed myself off my bed and settled into the visitor's chair beside her, so I could see her face. For the first time, I felt self-conscious that I was only wearing my shorts. They were the only item of clothing I had left. I'd handed the rest over to the police, her blood on everything else. I'd have to call my sister today and ask her to bring some fresh clothes before Caitlin woke up. I didn't want to frighten her any more than she had been already. You'd have to be the first pretty girl I'd rather woke up to me fully clothed than in just my underwear, I told her. I laughed quietly. Caitlin neither replied nor moved, she was so deeply asleep. I never wanted to see you hurt. I'm sorry I didn't help you sooner, I began hesitantly. No, that wasn't the first thing I wanted her to hear, reminding her of what had happened to her. I stared into space, my eyes focusing on her untouched meal tray. Do you want your ice cream? When she didn't respond, I helped myself to the little cardboard tub, lifting the lid with a slight sucking sound. The ice cream had already started to melt in the warm room. In between bites, I voiced the things I could say to her when she woke. Hi, remember me? I was oblivious to you getting hurt, so you're in hospital now. No. Could I sound more callous if I tried? I'm Nathan, I stole a shirt from a corpse and stuck it on you. Lovely. I wish I'd never seen you, and then neither of us would be here. I wish none of this had ever happened. True, but still not something I should say to her. If I hadn't seen her, she might be dead now instead of in hospital. I scraped the bottom of the cardboard container for the last melted drops. I'm sorry, I finished your ice cream. When you wake up, I'll owe you one. I stood up and took the empty container to my meal tray. All that I'd said should have been funny given my dark humor, but I had no laughter left. I only felt empty. Not even my stolen ice cream could help to fill that void. What kind of person stole a sleeping girl's ice cream? I made it to our shared bathroom before I threw up, her ice cream, mine, and probably most of the lunch I hadn't tasted. When I was done, I rinsed my mouth and left the bathroom, closing the door hard behind me. I returned to my own bed and stretched out on top of the covers. I folded my arms behind my head and stared at the ceiling for a moment before I spoke again. I'm sorry, Caitlin. I'm so sorry. My eyes started to water, probably from staring at the room light, so I closed them. 4. Dark. Pain. Cold. Tears. Screaming for them to let me go until my throat hurt and my voice was almost gone. No one. No reply, no light. More pain. Bitter tears. Alone in the dark when I needed help. I remember lying down, sobbing. Cold, rough, hard concrete. Dusty. Made me cough but no one heard. Cold and alone and hurting in the dark. Pain. Relief that no one had heard me, that there was no reply. Not alone was worse. Oh hell. 5. Go away, leave me alone. Caitlin cried in panic. I woke with a shock in the middle of the night. She was screaming and struggling to get away from someone, but there was no one else here. I sat on the edge of her bed and shook her gently, but she didn't wake up. She was locked in a deadly struggle with the people in her nightmare. She screamed abuse at me as I panicked and let go of her. There was nothing I could do. Gradually, her struggles gave way to helpless tears. Please help me, you promised, she whimpered. I tried to tell her I was here, that she was safe now, that there was nothing to worry about, because she was in the very best of care, but she kept going like she never heard a word of it. Her whispered, desperate pleas continued as I pressed the button to bring a nurse. It felt like forever before a nurse arrived. I heard her in the corridor, talking to another nurse. You go on down to tea, Judith. I'll just see to this one and I'll join you. It's that girl who came in last night, the one with the police guard. I heard one of them's pretty hot. The other nurse thought this was funny. You mean the young one who looks like Matt Damon? I heard he's her boyfriend. If she needs a nurse, it's probably because he isn't there to help her. Have fun, Carol. Sick of waiting, I spoke. If you're the nurse, come here. The nurse entered the room and sized me up, her look openly curious. At another time, I might have found her obvious approval gratifying. I know I would have liked what I saw. I would have responded by verbalizing the invitation in her eyes. Maybe I should have. I know I wanted to. Later. All those fleeting thoughts dissolved in my irritation that her attention was on me instead of Caitlin, whose sobs made my chest ache in sympathy. She's having nightmares and she won't wake up. Is there anything you can give her to help her? I can't, she told me flatly. What she's on and the condition she's in, hell, she's so sedated she shouldn't be able to have nightmares. She won't be waking up for a while. I see. I kept my voice equally flat. Please. You promised, Caitlin sobbed. No, don't let them. Who's she talking to? The nurse asked. Me. She wants me to help her. It came out bitter. Because I couldn't stop her nightmares. The nurse looked like she wanted to ask something else, but I didn't want to explore this any further. I let my eyes wander over her body. When I lifted my eyes to her face, I gave her a look that plainly said, "Damn, not bad." I hated myself for raising her expectations, knowing I was only going to dash them again in moments. She looked flustered, and I took the opportunity to get rid of her. "If there's nothing you can do for her, then I guess you're better off going back to the nurse's station, or wherever else you're needed." I flashed her my most charming smile, feeling cheap for not following it up with anything else. "Go to tea, Carol." Which Carol did, without hesitation. I stayed by Caitlin, where I promised I'd be, Nurse Carol's words running through my head. She won't be waking up for a while. Caitlin wouldn't miss me if I went downstairs for a few minutes. Not if she wasn't waking up for a while. I'd be back before she woke up. Perhaps I could make up for my curt dismissal of Nurse Carol and offer to pay for her tea. Caitlin was weeping quietly now, oblivious to me. I stood up and moved away from her toward the door, thinking of joining Nurse Carol for tea, coffee, or anything else she cared to name. Maybe getting to know the shapely Singaporean girl better. "No, please, don't leave me." Caitlin's voice grew louder and more panicked with each word. "You promised?" Swearing softly, I sat down beside her again and she was silent. Swearing a bit more, I realized there was only one way I was going to get any more sleep tonight. I grabbed a sheet and pillow from my bed and carefully cocooned her body in her own sheet. I squeezed in behind her, so I was half under her pillow and up against the headboard. If she hadn't been so small, I wouldn't have fitted. So, I didn't get to have a drink with Nurse Carol, but I got the consolation of sleeping with Caitlin. I stuck my pillow behind me to cushion my head from the cold, laminated surface of the headboard, and spread my sheet over myself as best I could. My last thought before I fell asleep was that under better circumstances, with a bigger bed and less clothes, I'd be happy to climb into bed with Caitlin, so maybe this wasn't so bad after all. Who was I kidding? It was a bloody nightmare. 6. Hold her for me. No. Hold her still. No. Don't touch me. Hold her down, I said. Touch me and I'll kick your face in. How are you going to do that with him holding you down? I said. No. 7. Movement and sound in the room startled me awake. I mumbled something vaguely threatening and opened my eyes. Nurse Carol was smiling, standing beside the bed, reaching toward my lap. Wow. The hot nurse was back. Yes, please. But of course she wasn't here for me. She brushed aside Caitlin's hair and checked her temperature. When she was done, she smoothed Caitlin's hair back down over her ear just as it was before. Her fingers rested on the pillow beside Caitlin's head for a moment before she pulled them away. Caitlin's pillow lay across my lap, hiding my eagerness. Thank God. Nurse Carol walked away from me to pick up the clipboard that held Caitlin's medical chart. She started flipping through it, carefully writing down her observations, her lips moving soundlessly. More than disappointed, I opened my mouth to say something to draw the nurse's attention to me. I closed my mouth quickly when Carol's eyes shifted from the medical chart in her hands to my face. It's good that you care about her so much. She'll need all your help and support when she wakes up. What the hell could I say to that? I'd be a callous, lying scumbag if I said I didn't care whether Caitlin recovered or not, but she made me sound like the girl's boyfriend if I didn't say it. So I said nothing. She tucked Caitlin's chart back into its pocket at the end of the bed. You shouldn't be in her bed with her though. One of the other nurses will kick you out if I don't. Hey, if she had a better offer for me, I'd be there. I looked up at her and thought about saying it, but decided I couldn't. Not yet. I cleared my throat. She sleeps better when I'm here. I smiled ruefully. So do I, because she's quieter too. Carol smiled at me. Well, you can't say I didn't warn you. I hope you get some sleep for the rest of the night. She took a deep breath. Take good care of her. We all want to see her make a full recovery." "So do I," I admitted, wanting to say more. While I was working out how to ask her out for later, she left. My chances with Nurse Carol crashed and burned. All because I got into bed with Caitlin. I shrugged and settled back to sleep, Caitlin's head still pillowed in my lap. Maybe later, when this job was over, I'd ask Nurse Carol to come join me for a drink. Maybe if I asked nicely, she'd even wear a nurse's uniform, one heaps sexier than the one she wore to work. Hell yeah. Sweet dreams, here I come. 8. Breathing in the dark. Not just mine. Help me. Get me out of here. Holding my breath. Breathe in, breathe out. Approaching closer. Too dark to see. Breathing faster. Are you going to hurt me? Sharp intake of breath. Are you going to hurt me? Almost panting. Too close. No. 9. You're mad, my sister told me, handing me the bag of clothes I'd asked for. You find some random girl left for dead on a beach, promise you'll protect her from someone who hurt her who's already dead, only to find out he has mates, so you're going to stick around to protect her from all of them too. It could be years before the police put them away, if they ever find them. What are you going to do, stay with her for the rest of her life? Marry her? She snorted with laughter. I shook my head, rubbing at my bleary eyes in the hope that it would wake me up. Caitlin had woken me with her screaming more than once last night. I promised I'd be here when she wakes up. She's been out for longer than I expected is all. She's been through more than anyone should ever have to, and I'm not going to do that to her. Just go home and let her wake up alone. Chris was quick to notice the gaps in my explanation. How do you know what she's been through? She's barely been conscious since you found her. I don't, I admitted. But she has nightmares, even with the drugs they're giving her, and they sound pretty bad. And I saw what she looked like when I found her. It wasn't pretty. I suppressed a shudder, but she noticed anyway. How bad is it? Can I see her? We were in the lounge at the end of the ward. It was only a short walk back to Caitlin's room, but still I hesitated. Don't touch her, I warned. If she touched her, she'd scream again and I couldn't handle it. I just couldn't. WH? She started to ask a question, but she looked like she was having trouble deciding which to ask first. Why she'd want to touch her, why she couldn't, or even what in hell I was thinking. Instead, she shrugged and followed me back to the hospital room. She thought I was crazy. She could be right. The guard outside the door looked askance at Chris. I nodded to him and he let her pass unchallenged. Chris didn't acknowledge the police officer at all. She stopped just inside the door and stared, looking puzzled. I looked closely at Caitlin, trying to work out precisely what Chris was staring at. It couldn't be the bruises on Caitlin's pale face. They'd faded to faint shadows now. She looked as beautiful as the first day I'd seen her. Caitlin's hands rested by her face on the pillow, each finger individually bandaged and splintered, an IV line slipped between the gauze. The bandages extended down her wrists like long white gloves. She wore a hospital-issue nightgown and she'd managed to kick the bedclothes off in her struggle against her nightmares, so everything the scanty nightgown didn't cover was on show. White dressings were stuck to her back, with more on her legs, particularly her ankles and her thighs. Bruises covered her exposed skin in a disturbing rainbow of dark colors. Before I could stop her, Chris crossed the room and grabbed Caitlin's sheet. She yanked it up to Caitlin's chin, covering her up almost completely. Her eyes turned to me. You need to take your own advice. I was annoyed at my sister. It's not like that. Have you ever known me to take advantage of a girl without her permission? Chris frowned deeply, her eyebrows almost meeting. She's not like any of the girls you usually bring home. She's younger, more fragile. She stopped, looking lost for words before her tone changed abruptly. How in hell did this little girl survive all that? She waved a hand over Caitlin's body, encompassing everything now covered by the sheet. "No one knows," I told her shortly, sitting heavily on the visitor's chair by Caitlin's bed. "But when she wakes up, it's one of the first things I'll ask her." "Yeah, well, I hope that's soon." She paused and looked at Caitlin again. "Or you'll have to adopt her." 10. Kissed me. 2 of them. Pinned me, forced me, kissed me. Why? Because I can. Nothing you can do to stop me. First one smelled and tasted bad. Rough. Hurt me. Told me what they'd do later. Fear. Cold. Wanting to cry. Won't show weakness. Stuff you. Second one, didn't want to let go. Called me beautiful. Oh God. Sorry. 11. A week without sleep and I was having trouble focusing. I couldn't sleep in Caitlin's bed with her. She'd scream the place down if I slept in my bed or anywhere else, and I couldn't wake her up. I swear I was so exhausted my eyes kept closing of their own accord, but it was only a matter of time before she had another nightmare and woke me. "Help me, get me out of here!" Caitlin screamed. I tried calling and then shouting her name, begging her to wake up. "You promised?" Caitlin sobbed. I tried talking over her, saying whatever came into my head. I may as well have talked to myself. She was oblivious to whatever I said. "Let me go, you bastard!" Caitlin's hoarse voice hissed as I crossed the room to the bathroom. I saturated a face washer with cold water from the bathroom basin and squeezed it out so that it dripped onto her face and neck. She started to cry. Her voice was a raw whimper. "Please, so cold. Give me my clothes back. Or a blanket. Get me out of here." I picked up her medical charts, trying to decipher her doctor's scribbled terminology, in the hope that it would put me to sleep. The word hypothermia caught my eye on the first page and I looked more closely at the hieroglyphics surrounding it. I remembered how cold she'd been on the beach, too cold to shiver in air that was close to freezing. Oh shit. I got a towel from the bathroom and dried every droplet off her skin. I wrapped her up in her hospital-issue blanket and hugged her till her tears dried up too. Dawn came before sleep did. I called my sister and asked her to get me some earplugs. I tried them the very next night. I got to sleep fine, but Caitlin's nightmares just got worse until she was screaming so loud the earplugs were useless. It took forever to calm her down. "Please don't let them," Caitlin begged over and over. Her words echoed in my head even after she lost her voice. The earplugs were in the bin before the sun rose. I prayed to any deity who'd listen that Caitlin would wake up and the nightmares would stop. "Oh God, please stop," Caitlin sobbed. "Yes, please stop." No deity heard me. Her cries for help were more heartfelt, more urgent and delivered in a far more desperate voice than mine. Even I listened and I couldn't do a damn thing for her. I don't deny I was desperate to leave. But the more I heard of her nightmares, the more I realized the horror of what she'd been through. I wasn't cruel enough to leave her here alone when I'd promised her I'd stay, till she woke up. "Please, you promised?" Caitlin's voice was a pitiful moan. I wanted to tell her how sorry I was for not helping her sooner. I turned the TV on to find it was Disney time. Close to the end of it, I guessed, because Prince Charming was about to kiss some girl in a long impractical dress and make the whole world perfect again. She woke up and was so pleased to see this perfect stranger in her bedroom that she fell for him, instead of calling the police. Wouldn't it be nice if the world worked on Disney principles? I couldn't begrudge Caitlin one kiss, in the faintest hope it would help. Hell, it couldn't hurt, could it? I shook my head and laughed at my own misguided idea. Sleep deprivation makes you think of stupid things. I dozed fitfully until the sun went down and woke to screaming. Some hours later, in desperation, darkness and insanity, I kissed her. I pressed my lips to hers for a second, nothing more. She froze for that second, then called me names and tried to claw my eyes out. My heart sinking with guilt, I closed my eyes and held my hands up in surrender, backing away slowly. I didn't dare touch her again, let alone try to fend her off. What kind of scumbag kissed a girl without her permission as she slept? A lower form of scum than the bloke who stole her ice cream. Kids' cartoons had no concept of rape. Prince Charming was never up on an assault charge, no matter how much the sleazy bastard deserved it. I pressed the nurse call button. There was nothing I could do to calm Caitlin down this time. They had to reset 3 of her broken fingers, and there wasn't a scratch on me. I kept my own fingers crossed that the nurses didn't ask me how or why Caitlin had ripped through the dressings on her hands. By some twist of fate, they didn't say a word to me at all. Good thing too, because I wasn't sure I had the guts to admit to anyone what I'd done. I paced up and down at the end of her bed, till the nurses were done. When Caitlin's fingers were firmly wrapped once more, the nurses left. Caitlin was quiet for a few moments, and I lay down on my own bed to try and get some sleep. "Let me go, you bastard," she hissed through gritted teeth but with considerable venom. "You keep fighting them, even in your dreams," I mumbled in her direction, closing my eyes. "Whatever you do, Angel, don't you let them win, no matter what. Keep fighting. Don't let them win," she murmured softly. I sat up in surprise looking at her, but her eyes were still closed. "Come on, Caitlin, wake up. It's my turn to sleep." But still she slept. 12. Waking up in the dark. Drugged blur. Couldn't see. Head hurt. Tied up. Cut myself free, dizzy when I stood up. Angry voices in the dark. Open door and light. Running, pushing past him in the doorway. Too dizzy. Dark again. Falling. His hands on me. I'll bite. He laughed. They're going to hurt me. 13. I have a few more questions. The police officer who came into Caitlin's room was familiar. Was he the one who'd started interrogating me the night we arrived in hospital, before giving me information? Or was he a hallucination, the unwanted child of sleep deprivation? Caitlin hadn't slept well last night either. Caitlin never slept well any night. She slept and screamed but didn't wake up. I was forgetting what it was like to sleep at all. My eyes itched from fatigue. I responded cautiously, "Okay." "Has she woken up yet?" He leaned over Caitlin's bed, looking closely at her face. He reached out as if to shake her shoulder. "Don't touch her," I blurted out, wincing. His hand stopped, curved not far from her. "Why not?" "She'll scream." I shuddered. I couldn't stand it when she screamed. I clenched my hands into fists so he wouldn't see them shaking. He looked at me for a moment, taking in my fists and the look on my face. He shrugged and seated himself in the visitor's chair by Caitlin's bed, angling his head toward me. "What do you know about the dead man you left on the beach?" His eyes were on me, his expression expectant. My brain felt slow and tired. He was hurting her. He was a big bastard with a gun. He and I got into a fight. "No," he interrupted. "You told me this already. What do you know about him, except for the few minutes before he died?" I thought for a moment. When I checked to see if he was dead, I took his shirt and put it on her. I figured she needed it more than he did, and he owed her that much. That was after he died. The grey shirt had been sticky with blood and it had wickered up the red like sweat, making the white Adidas logo stand out even more. There'd been half-healed welts on the man's back and chest that I'd wondered about, but the police officer probably knew more about them than I did. I only know what I saw. When I'd pulled the dead man's shirt over her head, it had left pink streaks on her face where his blood mingled with her tears. I remember feeling satisfied that I'd forced the lifeless bastard to help her when he was too dead to do anything about it, after all the pain he'd caused her. "But did you know anything about him before that night?" the officer pressed. No, I didn't know him. I paused, irritated. I'm not sure I would have wanted to either. He stretched his legs out in front of him, his arms above and behind his head. He looked at the ceiling, sounding thoughtful. He owned a holiday house not far from where he died. When his wife heard what had happened to him, she was very distraught. She thought he'd gone for a walk along the beach. He sighed. She was little and pretty with short dark hair. Her name was Laura. I snorted. Some walk. I wonder if she knew what he was really doing. Who knows? He smiled at me and stood up, looking at his watch. And now, I have to go. Thank you for your assistance. He strode out of the room, giving a brief nod to the guard outside before continuing down the corridor to the lifts. I shook my head. The dead bastard had a wife and her name was Laura. Who would have thought? 14. Not again. Too heavy. Couldn't breathe. Hurt me. Couldn't scream. Hurt me again. Gasping, sobbing. No air. Crushing weight lifted. A breath. Another. Why a reprieve? Touching me. No. A scream. Mine. Hurt me more. 15. Fuck me, but you took your precious time helping her, didn't you? Could you have let them fuck her up any more without killing her? I rubbed my eyes wearily. I hadn't grown a conscience that liked to swear and shout at me. The angry voice could only belong to my boss. Actually, he was my boss's boss. I'd only met him once before and I couldn't remember his name, but I did remember that arguing with him was a bad idea. If I didn't answer, he'd get to the point eventually. The boys in Canberra are breathing down our necks on this one, because of the high media profile. We've organised round-the-clock guards for her, and no one even gets her room number unless they have ID and they're on her list of friends and family. We need her and we need her to stay safe. If you want to catch the guys who did this to her, we need to know everything she can remember, he told me, keeping his voice low. Names, descriptions and what they did to her, with any dates and times she can remember. When she wakes up, I'll ask her, I said. Fuck Nathan, the police will be asking too, and if you want to get to them before the local police do, you need to know everything before they do. You've got to do better than just fucking wait. You need to be her fucking best mate. I sighed. So that means I have to stay with her? The hospital's going to discharge me today. How do you expect me to convince her she needs some random stranger around all the time without her suspecting, when she wakes up? He smiled. I'll take care of the hospital and arrange to have you stay for as long as necessary. The local police are already cooperating with you, right? He paused and I nodded. As for the girl, make yourself useful. Be your usual charming self and give her a hand when she needs one. Her hands look like they'll be out of action a while. Your charming personality worked on that receptionist. What was her name, Christy? Shit, Christy. Christy the receptionist had turned out to be religious, waiting for marriage and her true love before she'd let anyone in her pants. Even down on her knees, she'd been a disappointment. After she'd spilled all she knew and everything she wouldn't swallow, I hadn't seen her again. I'd been glad to give her up. I cleared my throat. Christy the receptionist was nowhere near as traumatized as Caitlin. That's not a fair comparison. Oh hell, I thought. I almost called Caitlin damaged. And she was, covered in blood and bruises and beaten and broken in. This one's not going to be won over by a bit of charm and a smile. This one's a shitload better looking than that receptionist, or so I've heard. A bit of an incentive, maybe? He lowered his voice. Look, the police are going on about how she was raped by more than one man. You're going to have to be honest with me on this one. You didn't? I waited, but he didn't tell me what he didn't want me to do. I didn't sleep with her. Is that what you mean? She wasn't offering and I'm not interested if she isn't willing. I winked. It's not as much fun if she doesn't enjoy herself. Or at least pretending she is, he replied, distracted. I forced a laugh. Not with me. No need, mate. I winked again, but my cheer felt hollow. There was no need when this was one girl I'd never sleep with. Oh God, what I'd give for a decent night's sleep without her. He sighed, looking wistful. Yeah, that's why you're the one who's pumping her for information. Don't let the police find out if you do decide to fuck her. He got up to leave. Let me know what you find out. And don't let anyone fucking kill her. 16. Don't touch me. Don't touch her. Don't. Can't stop. Must. Shouting. Shots. Hurts. No. Can't stop. Must. Hurts. Can't get up. Must. Red light. Blood. Scared. Slipping. Stars. Dark. 17. Caitlin slept peacefully for the moment. As the bright sunlight streamed through the window into her hospital room, I was incapable of sleep. I felt I owed her some explanation, and it was easier to tell her when she was asleep. I hesitated, not knowing how much to tell or how little. Maybe if I spoke my piece now I could resist telling her when she was awake and asking for answers. Or maybe I'd never have to tell her. She'd gone shopping and we didn't even know she was missing until hours afterwards, I blurted out before I realized what I was doing. It was weeks and she wouldn't answer her phone, no one had seen her. Then there were the envelopes. No return address, just printed labels on the outside and inside, ziplocked freezer bags with bloodied cloth and skin cut with a jagged knife. Sometimes every day or more than one every few days. I wouldn't let Chris check the mail, I put a lock on the letterbox so she couldn't. My voice died as I remembered again what I could never forget. It must have been over a month before her body turned up, dumped at the base of some sand dunes. Near where you were. I swallowed convulsively, but continued. For more than a month they'd just hurt her until they killed her. A memory I didn't want. One that plagued my dreams. I looked at Caitlin, wondering who her envelopes had been sent to. Nothing had been found at her house and she still lived at home with her father. Had they even sent them? Or were the cuts on her body something someone did just for the hell of it? I tried not to think about it. My thoughts went back to Alana, as they always did. I sat in the chair next to her bed, my closed eyes seeing only pictures of the past. Alana was my sister, my twin, but we were so different. She was always so cheerful, so determined to succeed and make a difference. She'd help someone when no one else would bother. The next thing you know, everyone would be helping her. She stopped to help a woman push her broken-down car off a busy road outside uni once. The two of them could barely budget, then a council truck pulled over and the whole road crew helped her get the car onto the curb. I was stuck on the other side of the road and 6 lanes of traffic, so I saw the whole thing. I wouldn't have believed it if it was anyone else but Alana, it's just who she was. We were at a party once and everyone was drinking. A normal uni party after the end of exams. A girl she didn't know was so drunk she passed out and hit her head as she fell. A room full of drunken med students and no one seemed to know what to do. Alana just stepped in and took charge. She knelt on the floor next to the girl. She sent one person for ice, another to call an ambulance, someone else to find the friend the girl had arrived with. By the time the ambulance arrived, she had the girl's name, contact details of her next of kin and everything. There was nothing for the ambulance officers to do but get the girl to hospital. Alana was such a fighter, she would never have given in to them. Never stopped fighting, never let them win. So they broke her and they killed her. How could anyone do that to her? I wanted to hunt them down and hurt them for what they did to her. But the police didn't arrest anyone and they could still do it again, to someone else. They'd do it to Chris next. My parents would never give in. I gritted my teeth, trying to force the thought out of my brain. Please wake up. I need to know how to find them before they can get to Chris. She's the same age as you, and I can't let it happen again. Not after. I looked at Caitlin, serene in sleep. It was hard not to see the corpse I thought she was. I didn't get there in time. I'd let it happen to her. I looked away at a mercifully blank wall. I'm sorry, Caitlin. I never wanted to see you hurt. Not like this. I should have helped you sooner. Once again I lay back and closed my eyes. I couldn't look at her anymore, but the image of her on the beach seemed burned into my retinas, eyes open or closed. Shit. Sleep felt like a dream I barely remembered, while this was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. 18. Took my clothes. Tried to fight. Threatened me. Scared. Froze. Cried. Couldn't fight. So cold. Shivering and cold in the dark. Two of them. One laughing, one clinical. Wanted someone to help rescue me. Superman? No one else, only me. Tears. Cold. 19. I paid little attention to the nurse in the room until she started to pull the curtains closed around Caitlin's bed, blocking my view of both of them. No, I said suddenly, hoisting myself off my bed and pushing the curtains open again. The nurse glared at me, anonymous to me now that her name badge was obscured by the curtain she held clenched in her hand. I'm changing her dressings. Even if she has to share a room with you, she's entitled to some privacy. She yanked the curtain shut again, and I heard the rustle of latex and cardboard as she pulled out a pair of gloves. Caitlin did her first practical placement for medical school in this ward, and we all know her. She won't want some sleazy bastard staring at her as she sleeps. Her voice was low but loud enough for me to hear it. I stepped into the area by Caitlin's bed, inside the curtains. You know the last thing she said before she passed out in the emergency department? She reminded me that I'd promised not to let anyone hurt her again. I stared back at the nurse. Until she wakes up and tells me otherwise, I'm just keeping my promise. I'm not letting her out of my sight while you're here. She raised her eyebrows and let out a snort of breath, but she didn't say another word to me. Pointedly ignoring me, the nurse snapped on her gloves and started opening the first of the large stack of dressing packs on Caitlin's bedside table. The first dressing she pulled off Caitlin's wrist revealed an open, ulcerated wound that looked painful. That's where they tied her up. There was rope gouging into her skin, caked with her blood. The nurse swabbed it with disinfectant. For a moment, the raw wound was hidden again as the disinfectant fumes stung my eyes and they started to water. Caitlin tossed restlessly as soon as the nurse's hands touched her, mumbling something I couldn't hear. My eyes still burning, I had to move to her bedside to discern the words. Please, you promised, she whimpered. At that, I dropped into the chair by her bed. I couldn't remember the last time I was this close to tears, primary school perhaps. The disinfectant fumes didn't help. I tried to speak but no sound came out. I cleared my throat and tried again. It's okay, Caitlin. You've been hurt. My voice shook but I made myself continue. We're trying to help you get better. The nurse snorted again, louder this time. You're in hospital as a patient now and all of us on the clinical team here are doing our best to help you get better. Your roommate is sleazy and, if I were you, I'd wake up fast so you can ask for a room transfer. I'd like you to wake up too, I thought but didn't say. I tried to focus on the nurse's hands, not the wounds she was treating. No matter what the nurse thought, I didn't want to stare at Caitlin's bare skin as she slept. Conscious and consenting was one thing, but she was neither, and she wouldn't be until she recovered, if ever. It took a real fucked up bloke to look at her in her current state and feel anything but pity, sympathy, and the fist-clenching desire to cause some righteous pain. Which I couldn't do a fucking thing about until she woke up and told me how to find them. The grumpy nurse gently rolled Caitlin on her side so she could reach some of the dressings on her back. The first one she pulled off revealed more nasty-looking ulcers and a patch of scraped skin. She reached for the eye-watering disinfectant wipes again as I winced and wanted to look away. I wished that Caitlin was wearing more than her hospital-issue nightdress. Normally that meant she'd be showing a whole lot of skin, but there were so many dressings on her that she seemed swathed in white, like a badly beaten angel. She may as well have been an angel fallen to earth, she had so little with her. The police had taken all her clothes, so the hospital gown was all she had. I felt guilty for wearing the clean t-shirt my sister had brought. It seemed an eternity before the nurse was finished, but I didn't take my eyes away from her until she left, without saying another word. Released from my vigil, I squeezed my eyes shut. My head in my hands, I tried to knead the livid images out of my forehead with my fingers. Under every dressing on Caitlin's body were wounds that screamed of repeated abuse, over and over again during the weeks they had her. Not for the first time I wondered how anyone could force themselves to look at that every day, job notwithstanding. I didn't know how I could stand to watch a nurse bear her every cut, bruise and break again tomorrow, or force myself to sit through this every day until she woke up. How did she manage to survive, driving herself to keep going as those sick bastards inflicted countless wounds on her body and mind, time and time again? Fuck. I didn't know. Wake up, Caitlin, so you can tell me the answers. Fucked if I knew. 20. The door was open. Someone calling me a little bitch. Attacked him. Hit me. Hit the floor. Blood pain. Pushing me down on top of me. Bound my hands. Broke my fingers. Screaming. Pain. Couldn't see for tears. He had a knife. Cut my clothes off. Tried to kick him. Couldn't see, too dark. He caught my legs. Pushed them down apart. Unzipped. Oh God, please no. 21. Anytime Caitlin was quiet, I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But it was a hospital and there were always doctors and nurses coming to check on her. Once there was a med student too. I tried to ignore them and kept my eyes closed, but I couldn't help listening. Maybe it was the sound of her voice, cute and young but serious too, like she really cared about her patient. She's probably pregnant. With rape a possibility, it's best to know as early as possible, she argued. My heart contracted, as if I were crushing it in my own clenched fist. Hadn't Caitlin been through enough? She needed to recover from her ordeal and one day learn to forget. She didn't deserve a lifelong reminder, a child belonging to one of the bastards who'd hurt her. She'd have scars enough as it was. No, she isn't. We checked twice. Both were negative. The other voice was calmer but sad. I breathed a sigh of relief. Like I said, it could have been a mistake or too early to tell. The sad voice sighed heavily. He sounded Irish. Or she was very early into the pregnancy and she miscarried. But that would have been before she was admitted. There was blood everywhere. Her eyes were open, staring at the stars in the sky. I'd thought she was dead. Do we know for certain she was raped? Another sigh. If she was awake, I could ask her. But she's a 17-year-old girl who's been through hell and a lot of pain, given how long she was missing and the state she's in now. I'd say it's pretty much a certainty. I've left a note in her file and I'm leaving it at that. There's no need to ask her or even mention it. She's definitely not pregnant. I'd ask Dr. Lannon just to be thorough. What if? Did you see her when she came in? He demanded. Blood and bruises everywhere. So cold. Twisted broken fingers. Haunted eyes. Screaming. Have you been here when she has nightmares? He pressed. Endless screaming, wanting to run. No, I've just read her file because she was on my patient list today. Her voice sounded subdued. I'd never seen such a long list of injuries. Line after line of damage. This girl was beaten and raped repeatedly for weeks, then left on a beach to die. It's been all over the news. Would you want to be the one to remind her and make her relive all the gory details? No, but I didn't have any choice. I had to ask her. I needed to know. A pregnant pause. A quiet "No, Dr. Lannon." Besides, she'll tell us everything we need to know when she wakes up. She's a med student, said Dr. Lannon with satisfaction. Even the fucking doctor knew more about her than I did. Do you know her? The doctor laughed. She stole my parking spot on her first day on prac here. A sharp intake of breath. What did you do? I parked somewhere else and told her what happens when you steal a doctor's parking space. Dr. Lannon sounded amused. What? He took a deep breath, no longer laughing. A midwife I met when I was an intern told me I'd be at that doctor's beck and call, running paperwork to the airport with medical evac patients and the like. He paused and sighed. But that was a country hospital, a long time ago. Here she'd probably just get me coffee. Caitlin's medical chart clacked as it was dropped into the slot at the end of her bed. Did she buy you a coffee? Dr. Lannon laughed again. No, my wife would kill me if I let strange girls buy me coffee. Which country hospital were you an intern at, Dr. Lannon? Footsteps leaving. Albany Regional. I heard the voices fade away down the corridor. I'd feel more comfortable if you called me Aiden. I still look around for my father whenever someone says Dr. Lannon, though it's been me for 6 years now. I drifted into sleep, trying to shut out the images of what Caitlin had looked like when I found her. Instead, they blended into a nightmare that I couldn't run from. When Caitlin's scream woke me, it was almost a relief. Angel, it's all right. I'm here. Wake up, Angel. It's over, I said as I settled into the chair by her bed, hoping her nightmares would keep me awake for a while. 22. Cold and alone. Sand. Couldn't feel anything anymore. Stab of pain. One of them hurting me. Too much pain. Too weak to fight anymore. Saw a gun. Time to end it. Gunshots. Screaming. No. Won't let them hurt me again. Promise? Angel. It's all right. I'm here. Wake up, Angel. It's over. 23. Hello, Caitlin tried to sit up, struggling against the sheets that tucked her tightly in the bed. She looked around, bewildered, stretching her hands out as if reaching for something. Where are you? Relief flooded through me. Finally. I'm here, Caitlin. I haven't left. I stood up so that all she had to do was look up to see me. Her eyes focused on me, but she looked troubled. In concern, I reached for her hand. Too late, I realized that I might hurt her. As my fingers grazed the gauze, I snatched them back. She looked at her hand in wonder at my touch, as if she'd felt it through the bandage. I'm not dead, am I? She asked in hushed tones. I almost laughed but caught myself. She looked as if she might cry if I said the wrong thing. You're doped up to the eyeballs and wrapped up like a mummy, but you're alive. Very much alive and in hospital where you should be. What happened? She quavered. I was at a loss for where to begin. I didn't know how to describe what she'd been through, just thinking about it was enough to give me nightmares. You were hurt. She started to shake her head, then grimaced as this caused her pain. No, I know that. There was lots of yellow with cartoon animals on the ceiling, but now I'm here and Winnie the Pooh is gone. She glared suspiciously at the ceiling. If I were Winnie the Pooh, I'd be hiring a bodyguard, I thought, hiding my smile. She looked as if she was ready to put him on a hit list. Her eyes fixed on me again, her voice firmer and more urgent. What happened? This time I didn't hesitate. You fought the nurses. You were so scared. I think they gave you something to make you sleep. You've been asleep for a while." She swallowed as if remembering was an effort. "I called for you. You weren't there. They said that you were being treated somewhere else. I wanted to get up to find you, but they wouldn't let me. I mustn't have tried hard enough." Horrified at the memory, I cut her off. "You did too much as it was. If you'd done any more, we might have lost you. You came so close, Caitlin. Hell, I was scared." She looked shocked. Embarrassed at having said it, I looked out the window, anywhere but at her. Careful. I had a job to do here and couldn't afford to make any mistakes. I waited for her to say something, but she was strangely silent. "Caitlin?" I asked, worried, looking back at her. "Oh fuck. Work could wait." She was far more important than any job. Seeing the tears cascading down her face and how hopeless she was at hiding them, I burst out, "Don't cry, Angel. It's over." That did it. She clung to me sobbing, and I just held her, letting her cry herself out. After what seemed like forever, when I figured she'd cried herself to sleep against my shirt, she pulled away, hiccuping. "Thank you. I think you saved my life." Biting her lip, hesitating, she turned her eyes on me. "Who are you?" I barely know you." She looked as if she might start crying again, her tears held back only by a force of will. I'd seen enough of her tears to last me into my next lifetime, or maybe just an eternity in hell after the end of this one. I answered immediately, all of my prepared beginnings forgotten. "My name is Nathan Miller. I found you lying on the beach. I just brought you into the hospital." At this, she looked at her hands bandaged up to her wrists, the IV drip taped to her already swollen right hand. "Nathan Miller," she murmured quietly before taking a deep breath and closing her eyes. "Nathan," she breathed, her eyes still closed as if my name were a new wine she were tasting, focusing on the feel of the word on her tongue. I found myself holding my breath, unsure of what to say to this girl, a near stranger. A hysterical thought occurred to me. If there were a wine with my name on it, what sort would it be? I didn't know enough about wine to imagine it. One with a high alcohol content that came with a hangover in the morning, that's for sure. But what would she do? Would she savor the taste and take another sip, or spit it out with a shake of her head, and refuse to let it pass her lips again? What was she thinking? I desperately wanted her not to reject me, this girl I barely knew. This girl I couldn't tear my eyes away from. She moistened her lips with the tip of her tongue before her mouth curved upwards in the slightest smile. "Thank you. You chose to keep your promise. Nathan." She opened her eyes slowly as she said my name, her tone caressing, those big dark eyes fixed on me as she tilted her head the tiniest bit to one side. How did she do that? One moment my head was full of questions about what she'd said before my name, then it was wiped blissfully blank. All I wanted now was to hear her say my name like that again. All I could think about was what I wanted to do to her to elicit that kind of response. Fuck no. There was no way in hell I could want a girl who was in hospital after being beaten and worse. A girl whose piercing screams woke me when anyone touched her, even in her dreams. I'd have to be a real sick bastard to want that. A sick bastard who's going to fucking forget he'd ever entertained the thought of wanting Caitlin, that's for sure, I promised myself. Her eyes no longer held mine, focusing first on her white swathed hands before moving to her lap, surveying the whole length of the bed. She looked up slowly, biting her lip, taking an inventory of her hurts. Knowing that her injuries were far worse than just those covered by the white bandages I could see, I swallowed and tried to speak. Better late than never. "I'm so sorry, Caitlin. If anything I did hurt you, I'm sorry." Now she looked puzzled. "You didn't? You were shot?" She looked at me, struggling to remember. She reached out, touching her palm lightly to the place where the bullet had grazed my shoulder. Through both the bandage and the fabric of my shirt, I barely felt her light touch, but the contact felt electric, as if there was nothing between her skin and mine. As if she touched a nerve that fed directly into my spine, a tingling that was far from painful. Hastily I answered, "Yes. So were you." But it could have been far worse if you hadn't distracted him. Thank you. I may very well owe you my life." She gave a tiny smile in reply, still looking troubled, but her next words were interrupted by a fit of coughing that left her breathless and exhausted. I shifted the pillows behind her so she'd be comfortable as she sank back into them. I carefully pulled her sheets and blankets up to cover her again, conscious of her eyes on me. "Will you still be here in the morning when I wake up?" she asked in a small voice. "Of course. Where else would I be? I'll lose my job if I'm not," I thought but didn't say. "Would you like me to be?" I asked instead. She nodded hesitantly, her eyes fearful. "Then I'll be here," I said with a smile. "Thank you," she responded softly, closing her eyes. "Nathan," she murmured a few seconds later, almost as an afterthought, as she drifted into sleep once more. I stood and moved to my own bed, intent on going back to sleep too. Brilliant. I'd made her cry, compared myself to a hangover in a bottle, and nearly propositioned her. Maybe the next time I stuck my foot in my mouth I'd do her a favor and fucking choke on it. My eyes snapped open as I realized. I turned to look at her, but she was asleep. I lay back on my pillow, now wearing a smile on my face. However badly I'd handled this, she still wanted me to stay till the next morning. 24. I woke to swaying, then a heavy thump accompanied by more swaying. I opened my eyes and looked automatically at Caitlin's bed beside me. It was empty. I stood up quickly, close to panic, before I saw her bandaged hand rise into view and clutch ineffectually at the sheets. They slithered off the bed as I watched, taking the blanket with them. The swaying intensified, but it was somewhat muffled. I realized I knew the angry voice, and I'd never been so relieved to hear it. "What's wrong?" I asked as I walked around the bed to where I could see Caitlin, thinking that she'd probably just fallen out of bed. Instead, she lay face down, her feet closest to the bed, as she struggled to get up with her damaged hands. It looked like she'd tripped and fallen flat on her face, before she'd pulled the bed linen down on top of herself. I knelt down to pull the blanket away from her head, thanking whatever helpful deity had made the linen fall so that it covered most of her. Caitlin was both angry and frustrated. "I can't walk and I can't get up." "Here, let me help you." I made good use of the blanket and sheet to keep some separation between her body and mine, tucking the whole mess around her as I picked her up. "Thank you," she said quickly, biting her lip, still looking a little flustered. "What happened?" She hesitated a moment before she spoke. "I got out of bed, tried to take a step, and it hurt. Then I fell." She frowned. "I can't walk if it hurts that much." "Perhaps you should stay in bed and rest then," I suggested. But I needed. I was trying to get to the bathroom. She wouldn't look at me as she said it. Understanding her embarrassment, I offered casually, "I can carry you in there if you like." "Thank you." Her gratitude was fervent. I looked from her to the bathroom. Oh shit. This time I'd have to do it with just her and the skimpy nightie. She'd scream for sure. I lifted her up and quickly carried her to the toilet in the ensuite bathroom, conscious of the hospital-issue nightdress she still wore and the amount of skin it didn't cover. I couldn't put her down fast enough, praying with every step that she wouldn't scream. I almost shuddered with relief when I let go of her, but I tried to control myself so she wouldn't see my reaction and take it the wrong way. Even injured, Caitlin was still one hell of a temptation, pretty in all the right ways. Wrong ways, I told myself as I turned my back and walked to the bathroom doorway to give her some privacy. She was damn fine in all the wrong ways, and it'd be really great if she had some clothes to cover up with, so I wouldn't be tempted any more than I had been already. After a moment's thought, I called back over my shoulder, "If you want, I could ask my sister to drop by your house the next time she comes in to see me, and she could pick up some of your own clothes for you to wear. Please say yes, please say yes." She was silent for a moment before she replied, "Thank you, but I think with all the dressings and stuff plus the trouble I'd have putting on or taking off clothes, I'm better off with hospital issue." Shit. Fair enough. I nodded, trying not to think of her wearing a backless nightdress with no underwear. Especially once the dressings came off. I'd just have to control my thoughts better. That's it. Not difficult at all. Hesitantly, I added, let me know when you're done and need my help again. I'm not done, but I may need your help. Her voice faded to a mortified whisper. I glanced over my shoulder and saw her pawing uselessly at the toilet paper dispenser, unable to grasp anything with her bandaged hands. She bit down hard on her lip in an effort to stop herself from crying. Oh fuck. This was just painful to watch. Did you know, I asked her as I crossed the bathroom quickly, ripping a wad of toilet paper out of the dispenser and pressing it into her upturned hand, that you looked just like a kitten batting at a new toy just now? It was very cute. I smiled gently, my eyes on her face to gauge her reaction to my poor attempt at a joke. And not look at what she was doing with the toilet paper. For a second she looked hurt, then she looked up and met my eyes. A small smile slowly spread across her face. Meow, she said, holding up her paws. I feel about as weak as a kitten, so the comparison is probably right. She sighed. Now, I would appreciate your help one more time, because I think you're right. I need to rest in bed a bit longer. At your service. I took a deep breath and braced myself. I carried her back to bed and attempted to tuck the sheets around her again. I'd never been so relieved to see a girl covered up. Casually, I mentioned that she could ask the nurses for help when she needed it. After all, that was why she was in hospital. I prayed she'd take the hint and let other women help her. Anyone but me. She looked down at her lap, not meeting my eyes. I know, but I feel uncomfortable asking some random stranger to help me with something so personal, and I don't like anyone touching me at the moment. She shuddered. Shit. I was on bathroom duty indefinitely. Was there any chance I could ask for her to be catheterized so I didn't have to? Fuck, that wasn't something I should think about either. I took a breath and let it out. She didn't need me to make her feel worse. She felt bad enough as it was. I tried to be funny. And the last time you asked a random stranger for help, you ended up in hospital with him and now you can't get rid of him. He even followed you into the bathroom. I smiled, attempting to make light of it. She looked up but didn't smile. After you saved my life, got shot and even helped me wipe my... She blushed, unable to finish. I don't think you qualify as a random stranger anymore. I'd like to think you're a very good friend even if I don't know you very well. And here I thought you were going to call me an asswipe. I shook my head in mock sadness, feeling nothing but uneasy relief. 25. Good morning, here's your breakfast. The ladies who served the hospital meals always seemed too cheerful to be real. The sleepless nights with Caitlin had meant they usually woke me from an uneasy doze, only serving to heighten the impression that their bright smiles were a hallucination. Yet here was one, smiling first at me, then at Caitlin. I heard you were awake, hon. The woman winked at her. I wasn't sure what you'd like, so I picked out the best of this morning's breakfast menu for you. I'll give you your menu too, so you can order what you like for tomorrow. Jokes about bad hospital food aside, I'd soon learned that they didn't apply to this place. I was most of the way through my eggs before I thought to ask Caitlin about her breakfast. Swallowing the last mouthful of egg, I asked her, so what's the best of this morning's breakfast menu? When she didn't reply, I looked over at her, only to see her breakfast was still covered. She concentrated on keeping the glass of orange juice between her bandaged hands firmly enough to lift it off the tray. She managed to take a mouthful of juice before slowly and carefully returning the glass to the tray. Caitlin? How's your breakfast? I asked, realizing that aside from the juice her tray was untouched. She stared down at the tray, her lips pressed firmly together. She couldn't even feed herself, I realized. And she was trying not to cry about it, but she wouldn't ask for help either. I took a step toward her, leaned over and pressed her nurse call button. Hey. She turned her tear-filled eyes on me, suddenly angry. You need someone to help you with your breakfast, I told her gently. I was managing fine. She reached for the orange juice again, but only succeeded in knocking the glass off the tray and onto the bed. Oh hell! Her tears spilled over too, streaking down her cheeks as she tried clumsily to climb onto her pillows without using her hands, to avoid the spreading pool of orange on her sheets. I hesitated a second before I offered, "Please, let me help." This time I didn't wait for an answer. I lifted her out of her bed and transferred her to mine. I pushed my breakfast tray away from her and dragged her breakfast-laden table over. She turned away from me, reaching for a tissue that she couldn't grasp. I reached over her for the same tissue with markedly more success. I carefully wiped every trace of tears from her face before I helped her blow her nose. It wasn't until I walked away from her to put the tissues in the bin and wash my hands that she spoke. "Thank you," she said in a small voice. I didn't say anything. When I returned, I sat next to her on the bed, pulling my tray onto the table beside hers. I lifted the cover off her plate to find she'd been given the same as me. "So, do you want those eggs?" I asked her. "Just the thought of being fed like a baby makes me lose my appetite," she stated in the same small voice, not looking at me. "Because I wouldn't mind them if you're not eating them," I continued, as if she hadn't spoken. I picked up her cutlery and started to cut them into bite-sized pieces. I slid one piece onto the fork and waved it in front of her. "Last chance." She took it. She chewed thoughtfully with her eyes closed for a moment before she swallowed and looked at me. "More?" I asked blithely, loading up the fork again. "Please," she answered with a hesitant, watery smile. I helped her to eat as much as she could, occasionally taking a bite of the remains of my breakfast. She ate the eggs and some toast, but she wouldn't touch the cereal. I offered her my orange juice, as yet untouched, in place of her lost one. She threw her arms around me in a hug as unexpected as it was clumsy, considering the orange juice was part of it. "Thank you so much, Nathan," she murmured in my ear. Then she gasped and pulled away from me, suddenly very interested in her near-empty breakfast tray. I turned to see what had startled her, and saw the now-forgotten nurse I'd summoned with the call button. She shouldn't be out of her bed. The nurse glared at me as she spoke. Her name badge read Judith. Oh, Nurse Carol's friend, I thought. Who told her I'm Caitlin's boyfriend? Before she called me a sleazy bastard. Right. We had an accident with some orange juice. Until you can get someone to change the sheets, I'm sure she'll be perfectly comfortable in my bed. I gave the nurse a smile that said, I know there's more than one way you can take that, and they're all true. More than a little flustered, she mumbled something about linen as she bundled up the orange sheets and left in a hurry. 26. Waking again in the dark. Hurting. Hungry. Cold. Didn't want him to touch me. He had food and a blanket. Blanket was rough, scratched tender skin. Horrible to be fed by a stranger, my hands tied. Wouldn't untie me. Food was dry, stale cereal, hard to swallow with a dry throat. Drink spilled and burned. Fighting it. Hurting. Wanting to give up, for it to be over. No. Whatever it takes to stay alive. Keep fighting. Don't let them win. 27. I left Caitlin for a couple of hours to get some clothes from home. She'd assured me she wouldn't need me till her next meal. Full of misgivings for leaving her alone, even with one of our guys on guard outside, I resolved to be as quick as I could. My car was in the car park, exactly where Chris said it would be. I didn't know how Chris had gotten home afterwards. I was certain she'd make me pay for it when I saw her next. As I unlocked the car, I said a silent prayer that she'd be at university today instead of at home. It was like they were watching me. I parked my bum in the driver's seat and shut the door just as my phone rang. I answered with a hello, but that's all I managed to say before the interrogation began. She's awake. Michael called in his report already and you haven't. What has she told you? ASIO wasn't omniscient, no matter how much they'd like to be. Michael had probably called the minute I left Caitlin's room, bored of guard duty with nothing to report. Forgetting my sister, I thought of the pretty girl with the haunted eyes I'd reluctantly left watching TV not 15 minutes ago. That she doesn't want anyone touching her, she doesn't like breakfast cereal, and her recovery is going to take a while. A snort. Breakfast cereal? What kind of fucking help is that? We want intel, we want to know where they are. We want to know who they are and what they did, not her fucking favorite foods. What the hell's wrong with you? Where do I start? I wondered. I'm trying to build up some trust with her. She's hellishly traumatized. She's only been awake a day and she's had to deal with some pretty crippling injuries. I'm getting what I can, but it'll be a few days before I can get anything useful out of her. Just let her recover a bit first. We don't have time to wait for her to feel perfect again. We need to know how to find them, and soon. Before the police. Today, Nathan. I felt uneasy. If I stuffed this up, I'd have to leave and someone else would have to start over. It'd be even harder for anyone else, if Caitlin told them anything at all. And who'd take care of her if I left? I had to do this. I'll try, I conceded grudgingly. An angry grunt. Don't forget we broke protocol to allow you in on this one, Nathan. You're in hospital with her because of your special skill set, nothing else. We can easily pull you and get someone else. No one else would get as much out of her as quickly as I can, I replied instantly, knowing it was true. Then fucking do it. He hung up. I started the car with a sigh and a turn of the key, my heart heavy. I took my time driving home, selecting and packing a heap of clothes to take to hospital, then driving back to Caitlin. I delayed a little more, stopping at the supermarket for some supplies. When I reached her floor, Michael hurried toward me, a finger to his lips. He grabbed my arm to stop me from going to Caitlin. I shook him off angrily. He started to explain. You know that friend of hers, Joe, who comes in every morning? The one who asked for updates from the nurses on Caitlin's condition? I nodded curtly, not saying anything. I'd seen the girl, who was on Caitlin's short list of approved visitors. She'd come into Caitlin's hospital room, glared at me for a few minutes and left again. I hadn't thought much about her until now, but already I was worried. We think one of the nurses tipped her off that you'd gone out. She's just arrived and I don't think you should go in just yet. Michael looked nervous. So he bloody well should. He'd left Caitlin alone with a stranger. I stared at him. If you think I trust some girl I don't know with Caitlin's safety. I tried to keep it quiet, but I was pretty pissed off. Michael had both his hands up, gesturing to tell me to lower my voice. He looked scared. Word from the boss is to listen, see if she tells her anything she hasn't yet told us. You can hear her from the doorway, close enough to get to her quickly if you need to, he said in a low voice. Reluctantly, I nodded once. Together we walked back to Caitlin's room. At least you're looking better, I heard Joe's unfamiliar voice say. Where's your gallant hero this morning? Off polishing his sword? She paused a moment before continuing. Oh come on. The half-crazed look in his eyes, full of guilt for what he did to you, and the anguish he's causing you now by sticking around? You're barely a shadow of yourself, what did he do to you? Incensed, I wanted to storm in and evict the little idiot, but Michael shook his head, signaling me to wait. Caitlin, please. You cry at the drop of a hat and there he is saying nonsensical things like, it's all over now, when it never will be, not until you get rid of him. She paused again. The bruises on your face are fading. You're starting to look almost normal now. At least he isn't hitting you anymore. Fucking bitch. Like I'd ever do that. Not Caitlin. Not ever. I looked at Michael. This is what he wants us to hear? I hissed. I don't need to listen to this bullshit. He was grim. He said wait. We wait and listen to whatever Caitlin says. The other one doesn't matter. The fuck it didn't matter. Like Caitlin would trust me if she thought I'd hurt her. A long pause, as if Joe was waiting for Caitlin to reply, but I heard nothing before she spoke again. It's lucky that he found you when he did. Caitlin sounded confused. It's incredibly lucky that he was walking on that bit of beach just after you were dumped there. It couldn't be a coincidence, he knew you'd be dumped there, didn't he? He was one of them. Finally, I heard Caitlin's voice. I was lucky he was there, she agreed half-heartedly. It's all right, you can tell me, Joe encouraged. I know he was one of them. Caitlin sounded confused again. One of them? One of the ones who hurt you, Joe explained, as though to a child. Now she was upset. Nathan never hurt me. Fucking right I didn't. I took a step toward Caitlin, ignoring Michael shaking his head behind me. Joe's voice had dropped lower so that I could hear her speaking, but I couldn't discern the words. Growing worried, I moved closer to the door until I heard Caitlin's voice again. My knuckles were white as my fingers gripped the doorframe. No. She was vehement. He never did anything like that. He couldn't do that to me. He would never. I could hear the tears in her voice. This was fucking useless. We wouldn't get any information out of her like this, and it was only going to take longer, till I did. You didn't always see the face of the man who was hurting you, did you? Joe demanded. No, wait, Michael started to say as he grabbed my shoulder, but I shook him off. There was no fucking way I was going to let some girl upset Caitlin like this, no matter how good a friend she claimed to be. I stormed into the room and sure enough, Joe had made her cry. I strode straight to Caitlin to give her a hug. I glared at Joe over Caitlin's shoulder as I asked her just loud enough for Joe to hear, "What did she do to you?" Joe glared back at me for a moment before she turned on her heel and left. Good riddance. Fuck off, bitch. I soothed Caitlin as best I could, all the while thinking that there was no way I'd ask her anything upsetting today. Her so-called friend had made her cry enough. No, my boss's fucking stupid idea had made her cry enough. If he'd only let me do my job and stayed out of it. It was going to take me all day to undo the damage he'd done. She'd done. Both of them had done. Today was for her. I'd give her whatever she wanted in an effort to make up for my absence in the morning. I kicked my bag across the floor to my bed, hearing the crackle of plastic before I remembered. Hey, I brought contraband, I said to Caitlin. She asked, a single tear sparkling on her cheek as it slid down. I knelt on the floor and unzipped my bag. I owe you ice cream, so I thought I'd get the best. I pulled out a tub of ice cream, one of the expensive ones that seemed to only come in 1-liter tubs. It had probably melted while I'd waited, but I told myself it was the thought that counted. If she liked it. If she didn't, I'd eat it myself. Caitlin bit her lip, trying to wipe her last tear away. I don't remember. Why would you owe me ice cream? Oh fuck. I hesitated before deciding to tell her anyway. When we first got here, you were asleep and not going to eat your meal. I did something really horrible. I took a deep breath, trying to make it sound worse than it was. I'm really sorry. I stole your ice cream. She looked as if she wanted to laugh, but she didn't. Her big eyes turned grave. That's okay. I'm sure that will go some way in helping me forgive you. I laughed, but not for long. I wondered how serious she was. Oh well, if this sweetened her up, I'd be laughing again before long. I tore open the tub and dug a spoon out of the bag. Ice cream? She gave me a tiny smile. Yes, please. I crossed the fingers on the hand I held the tub with while I plied the spoon with the other, making sure the cardboard hid my bid for luck from Caitlin. I'd have to ask her again soon whether I liked it or not. Just not today. Maybe tomorrow. 28. Still dark. Tied up. Rope on wrists, legs. Someone else there? Help. Water. Let me go. Coughing. Can't. Help me, you bastard. Tears. Rope burns blood. No. I'm going to. Sorry. 29. Time to change your dressings. Let's see how you're healing up. Nurse Carol sounded more cheerful than I'd ever heard her. I wondered if it was because Caitlin was awake, or whether the shapely nurse had had a hot date the night before. It sure hadn't been a night with me. Caitlin's eyes on the nurse showed her relief. Hi, Carol. Of all the wards to bring me to, I ended up here. Carol's voice was brassy bright. Of course. We had to fight for you, but we traded a couple of sporting injury patients to the other wards to keep you. Caitlin coughed out a painful little laugh. My throat ached in sympathy. You just wanted fewer names to learn at handover. You know it. Actually, while you were asleep, there have been some very interesting men in the ward keeping guard over you. I almost thought about asking them to pull out their weapons. Carol blushed as she said it. Her eyes traveled to me and quickly looked away. I wondered if she included me as one of those interesting men. I have guards? Caitlin asked, her eyes widening. Oh shit. Hadn't I told her? I struggled to remember, amid all the things I'd said to her while she was asleep, and in the brief time she'd been awake. I couldn't remember if I'd told her that her room was guarded. Sure, a different police officer every day, like some sort of desk calendar. They make sure you don't have any unwelcome visitors. Plus, Carol's gaze strayed to me and Caitlin's followed. I stared into Caitlin's eyes for a moment, wishing I could work out what she was thinking, but I didn't know her well enough for that. The depths of these windows into her soul were dark to me. I sighed and looked away first. I thought you had a new man, Scott. How does he stack up against the desk calendar guys, or is he out of the picture now? Caitlin asked. Oh, the hot Singaporean nurse had a boyfriend. I bet I could have made her forget him easily if I'd tried. A pity that I hadn't. Inwardly, I shrugged. I had enough to think about. The nurse wasn't a priority. I'm still with Scott, but that doesn't mean I can't look. Carol cleared her throat. So where do we start? What does it matter? I guess it's time for me to see what they've done to me, Caitlin said, sounding resigned. I heard the sound of adhesive gauze parting from skin and stared fixedly out the window. The strong smell of disinfectant stung my eyes. There was a small spider in a dense web in the corner, its legs and underside up against the glass. I tried to count every leg, every joint. Oh hell. That looks bad, Caitlin struggled to say. My eyes darted to her. She stared down at her lap, and I caught a glimpse of the mess the bullet had made of her leg. A skin graft over that would help hide the scar, Nurse Carol said gravely. Caitlin's voice sounded weak. But where would you take the graft from? Everywhere is. Her voice faded as the tears took over. I crossed the room, hesitating as I approached her. I didn't want to see that leg wound, but I didn't want her to cry either. Shit, now that she was awake, it wasn't as simple as before. She might not even want me here. Carol looked up at me for a moment, before her eyes returned to Caitlin. Hey, that's the worst of your wounds. The rest are healing up nicely. You'll see. She worked to cover the bullet wound up again as I watched. The next piece of gauze the nurse removed uncovered a series of shallow cuts that looked like someone had tried to carve letters into her leg. Now that they were healing, I could see the shapes of the scars. I swallowed, trying not to say anything. How could they? I gritted my teeth so hard it felt like I'd break them. I didn't relax until the nurse smoothed a dressing over her leg. I breathed again, sure the wound on her other thigh couldn't be worse. My eyes flew to it expectantly. Nurse Carol ripped the dressing off. Oh God, I burst out before I could stop myself. I could feel my jaw lock open, too horrified to close. Both of the girls regarded me with consternation. Caitlin lifted her arms up, as if she was considering asking for a hug. Her hospital gown showed the dark, damp splotches where her tears had landed. Darker blue on blue. I didn't wait for her to ask, rushing the last few steps to comfort her. I squeezed my own eyes shut as she cried into my shirt. Plastic and paper crackled as Nurse Carol covered up the livid letters that spelled Chris in jagged lines across Caitlin's thigh, matching the crossed-out Alana on her other leg. 30. Hurting. So cold. Go away. Let me sleep. End this. Don't hurt me anymore. Buzz off. Keep fighting. Don't let them win. Knew the voice. Didn't say that. Not when they hurt me. Wasn't there. He's dead. Saw him get shot. Can't be him. Must be a dream. 31. Caitlin's screams woke me again, so I lumbered out of my bed and over to hers before I was fully awake. Taking care to make sure her crisp cotton sheet was between us, I folded her into a comforting hug. It's okay, I'm here. I murmured. Keep fighting it, don't let them win. I waited for the screaming to become sobbing, before she calmed down enough to lie still again. When I was sure it was over, I gently let her down onto her pillows and stumbled back to my bed. The vinyl floor was cool beneath my feet. Nathan? Caitlin's voice was quavery. Shit. It wasn't over yet. No sleep for the wicked. It's all right, I'm here, I began wearily, sliding my hand down her back to lift her into my arms again. She gave a shudder and pulled away from me, sitting up on her own. What are you doing? Why were you touching me when I woke up? Oh shit. I crossed my arms over my chest, suddenly wide awake. You've been having a lot of really bad nightmares and you wouldn't wake up. You were screaming. Screaming for me to help you. You don't scream as much if I hug you. I sounded like the worst kind of deviant, watching and touching her while she slept. How often have you hugged me? Caitlin asked cautiously. I didn't want to answer, but it was better if I did. The nurses would tell her anyway if I didn't. Whenever you had nightmares until you stopped screaming. Her round dark eyes held a lot of things in their depths: betrayal, sadness, panic. She didn't say anything, but her eyes said plenty. I did it because I couldn't wake you up. I promised. I promised I wouldn't let them hurt you, and they were hurting you in your dreams. I couldn't just sit by and do nothing. I spoke faster than I'd intended. Shit. It was like I'd told my boss, charm and a smile wouldn't work on Caitlin. I was fucked. She bit her lip, still not saying a word. That's all, I swear. The same as tonight. It helped you to calm down, stop screaming and settle back into a peaceful sleep. I swallowed. Except the one time I went too far and kissed her, when she let me know just how much she didn't like that. Shit, don't even think about it. Her voice was soft and she spoke slowly, as if considering each word. That explains some things. She didn't explain anything. Her big eyes studied me. Nathan, could you do me a favor? If she let me stay like I was supposed to after this monumental fuck-up, I'd do just about anything. Sure, I replied. Next time I have a bad dream, can you please wake me up first? Her eyes were pleading. I smiled broadly. Sure, I said again, turning on the charm just a little in relief. With pleasure. She shrank back against the pillows, her eyes wide with fear once more. But please don't touch me. I felt my heart shrink in response. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know how to do it without touching her. I stared at her for a moment before closing my eyes, nodding wearily as I headed back to bed. I got the message all right. I was more useful asleep and on the other side of the room. I wasn't going to argue with that. 32. In the evening, I sat in the chair beside her bed, watching some program that Caitlin found more interesting than I did. It seemed to be about some women who agonized over their inability to have a perfect, long-term relationship with a man, in between trying men on the way they tried on clothes. It was funny, if nothing else. More than once I saw a watery smile float to the surface of Caitlin's expression, before it sank to the hidden depths again. I ached to see her smile properly or even laugh. I found my thoughts drifting to what I could do to lift her spirits. I decided to go to the gift shop downstairs and pick up some chocolate. I stood up, opening my mouth to tell her I'd be right back. The phone rang on the bedside cabinet between us. We looked at each other, surprised, before she started to reach for it. She's going to realize she can't pick it up, then she's going to cry, I thought. Quicker and closer, I hit the button that put the call on the phone's hands-free setting. "Hello?" I answered quickly before she could react. An older man responded in a heavy accent, sounding confused. I was looking for Caitlin Lockyer. I'm her father." My eyes went to Caitlin questioningly. She nodded as she spoke up. "Hi, Dad. I'm here. I've only just checked my messages. We've been out of range of all but sat phones for the last month. The police got a hold of me just as we left, to say they'd call me if they had any updates, but it didn't seem that they did. Your friend Joe left a message for me to say you'd been found but you were in hospital. What happened?" I took a step toward the door, trying to keep my voice as low as possible. "Did you want me to stay, or will you be okay if I?" I gestured toward the corridor beyond her room. Caitlin shook her head, looking unconcerned. Go, she mouthed, waving her hands as if she were pushing me out the door. I went, smiling and nodding in what I hoped was an understanding way. As she started to tell a very abridged version of what she'd been through, I listened to her tone. Careful, as flat as she could make it, Caitlin barely sounded distressed at all as she recited, "Some men pulled me into their car, knocked me out and took me somewhere dark. They hurt me. Someone found me, took me to hospital." Here she paused, as if she needed something to give her the impetus to carry on. I hesitated, wondering if I should turn around and go back in. I heard the murmur of her father's voice but not the words, as I was too far down the corridor. I stopped and strained to hear her reply. I wasn't out alone after dark. It was broad daylight. I was shopping for Jason's birthday present, she said, sounding resigned. Her voice dropped lower so I couldn't hear more. Who was Jason that she needed to get him a birthday present? Forgetting the chocolate, I returned to her room. I debated whether I should go back in or not, and decided to do something I'm not proud of. I stood beside her open door, out of her line of sight, and listened to the whole conversation. Her father's voice was the next I heard. "Will you be okay if I take this contract? It's a whole 3 months with an exploration drilling rig, but they've offered me so much money I don't want to turn it down." 3 months? She'd be alone in her house for 3 months, and there was no one there now. I needed to get our remote surveillance guys in and out of there before she got home. I'd call them as soon as she was asleep. Work would be happy I had something to report, even if it was just intel on her house. "Sure, Dad, I'll be fine," she murmured. "I'm still going to be in hospital for a couple of weeks, and it's not like I can't cook when I get home. Take photos, okay? Something cool. You know I like to see what you're up to, even if I have to wait till you're home to see them." "Bye, honey, they're calling my flight, time to go again." "Bye, Dad," she said softly. I heard the dial tone as he hung up, then her deep sigh. I ached for her. I wanted to see her smile again. Now more than ever. I skipped the lifts and ran down the stairs to the ground floor gift shop. I was going to get her the best chocolate they had. I wished I'd asked her what she liked, but everyone liked chocolate peanut brittle surely. If she didn't, I'd eat it and go back to get her something else. Or should I just buy a bit of everything that looked good? I figured that could work. I checked my wallet to make sure I had enough cash. "That's a lot of chocolate," the woman with white curls in the gift shop said with a smile. "Are you trying to impress a lady?" I allowed myself a proper smile. "Perhaps," I replied with a wink. She looked a little flustered. "Well, I'd be impressed," she said defensively, looking away so she could put my purchases in a bag. I thanked her and ran up the stairs 2 at a time, back up to Caitlin's room on the second floor. I dropped the bag of chocolate on Caitlin's bedside table with a grin, turning to see her reaction. She was fast asleep, tears sparkling on her eyelashes in the last rays of the sun, and I didn't have the heart to wake her. The empty pill cup on her table told me she'd be out for a few hours, so maybe it was a good idea for me to try and get some sleep too. As I relaxed into my pillow, I wondered who'd given her the pills and helped her drink the water to wash them down. I figured it was probably the nurse who administered them. I shrugged and slept. 33. Wrists bound in rope and blood. Cutting. Hurting. Twisted. Lost. Too cold. Oh God. Broken. Too dark. So much blood. Too late. Heart frozen. Do it. Give me death. End it. 34. I woke with my heart beating against my ribs for escape. Who gave her the medication she took last night? Why did I go to sleep without finding out, making sure she was okay, checking to be sure? Who was on guard? Shit, I couldn't even remember his face. Was he there for the phone call and all the time I was gone? Was he still here so I could ask him? Fuck, what if I'd fucked up and let them get to her? I held my breath, hoping and praying my dread was unfounded. Please, let her be okay. In the dim light filtering in from the corridor, I could see Caitlin shift restlessly in her bed. She whimpered as if she was in pain or trapped in another nightmare. I breathed again. I wanted to hug her, I was so happy to see her alive, but I remembered. Even if she was having a nightmare, I wasn't stupid enough to do it again. Caitlin, Angel, wake up, I said, sitting up. It's a dream. Only a dream. Wake up. I stood up and stretched. The ache in my muscles reminded me how much I wanted to visit the gym. I wondered if the hospital had one for staff. Fuck. Focus. Wake Caitlin and ask her. I repeated the same words, a little louder. I crossed the room to be closer to her. Angel. Caitlin, it's a dream. Only a dream. Wake up. See? I'm here just like I promised, and you're safe, I swear. She didn't seem to have heard me, still struggling against her sheets and the scary men in her dream. Her scream shattered what was left of my sleepiness, like a screen of clouded glass. I stumbled, swallowed, and told myself I was made of sterner stuff than the scrambled eggs I expected for breakfast. I took the last step that left me standing beside her bed, my shorts flush against her sheets. I reached over her and hit the switch by her bed. In the flickering beam of the fluorescent light, I saw her eyes flutter. It's a dream, Angel. Wake up. It's me, you're in hospital and everything's going to be fine. A headshake blinking as Caitlin slowly sat up, her face sinking into shadow. Nathan? I broke into a smile. That's me. She slowed her breathing from a panicked pant to something closer to calm. I'm safe in hospital with you. Right? Yeah, I replied, yawning. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I wouldn't manage it until I asked her what I should have found out last night. Who gave you your afternoon meds? She thought for a minute. Judith, no, Carol. Carol was on last night. I said I was having trouble sleeping, so she found me some milk in the handover room fridge. I was out like a light. She didn't meet my eyes. You must have been tired, I responded with a smile, trying hard not to think of her crying herself to sleep without me yesterday. Taking medication without me checking to make sure it was safe. I felt guilty already and no amount of chocolate would make up for it. I'd been lucky was all. I couldn't afford to fuck up like that again. It could cost her life, my job and Chris. I closed my eyes trying to clear my head before I opened them again. I won't keep you up. You need your rest to heal. I turned away and padded across the vinyl back to bed. No, wait, Caitlin said softly. I stopped. Would you please sit by me for a little bit, till I calm down properly? I just want to get some of the horrible pictures out of my head. The police come to take my statement tomorrow and I can't stop thinking about all the things I have to say. Last chance. The perfect opportunity to ask. Just don't be stupid and don't go back to sleep. I settled in the chair beside her bed, shifting so that I faced her. Can you tell me about them? Maybe that'll help them go away faster. I didn't dare cross my fingers for luck, but in my heart I hoped. She looked fearfully at me. Nathan, I don't even want to think about them. Talking about my nightmares will only bring them back. No, it won't, I coaxed. That's what all the psychologists and counselors say. You wait. They'll tell you it's good to get it out, and your heart will feel lighter. Caitlin shook her head. Nathan. Fresh tears started to flow. She lifted her arms, shaking with her first sob. I hesitated. I wasn't stupid, but I wasn't heartless either. I moved from the chair to her bed so I could hug her like she wanted. It felt like the right thing to do too. I can't, Nathan, not yet. I can't, Caitlin murmured as she clung to me and cried. Fuck it. I stroked her hair. It's okay. You don't have to. 35. It was a shiny red Mercedes. Not the newest. The driver looked at me. Friend in the back. Saucer eyes. Someone hit me, pushed me into the back of the car with saucer eyes. Two in the front. Passenger, driver. Passenger hit me, drugged me. Sorry. Oh God, so sorry. Fight them. Don't let them win. Sleep and remember. Until later. 36. We need a statement from you, Miss Lockyer. The police officer sounded almost hesitant. After last night I was too. I understand this will be upsetting for you, but we need your assistance to catch the people who did this to you. Caitlin bit her lip and nodded, her eyes downcast. Her hand reached for mine and I held it carefully, mindful of her fingers. The police officer cleared his throat. Mr. Miller, I'll have to ask you to leave or at least step outside. Unwillingly, I rose. I tried to let go of her hand, but I couldn't. Somehow she twined her fingers through mine and couldn't or wouldn't let go. She emitted a strangled sound as I tried to detach her gauze-shrouded fingers, so I stopped. I looked hard at Caitlin, but her eyes remained fixed on her lap. Her face grew paler the longer I looked. No. The firmness in her voice surprised me and the police officer too. I'm sorry? He looked confused. You won't give a statement yet? Caitlin looked up, her brow furrowed. I'll make a statement now, but I want Nathan to stay. The police officer cleared his throat. Mr. Miller is a suspect in this matter and we'd prefer that your statement is made privately, so you feel safe and don't hold back information. Your statement will remain confidential. Caitlin's eyes locked on his and her voice hardened. Detective, I will never feel safe until I know every one of those bastards can't touch me again. And I will never feel safe alone with a police officer, after one of them shot at me. Nathan shouldn't be a suspect in this. He didn't. He's about the only person who hasn't hurt me. Her voice was firm through most of this but wavered toward the end. Her eyes filled with tears which spilled down her cheeks. She reached for a tissue with one bandaged hand, then the other, unsuccessfully. I reached over and pulled a tissue out of the box, holding it out for her. Caitlin turned her sad eyes to me, her useless hands held out in front of her. Please, she whispered. I hesitated a second before I carefully wiped her tears away. She turned back at the police officer. I can't use my hands and I can barely stand, let alone walk. I feel so helpless. One of these pillows would probably be an effective weapon against me." She gave him a sad little smile. "I know I need to make a statement so you can catch the people who did this to me, no matter how upset talking about it will make me feel. I'll do it, however many tears it takes, but please don't make me do this alone." Her voice faded to a whisper. She looked pleadingly at the police officer, then at me. I spoke first. "If you want me to stay, I'll be here for you." The police officer looked hesitant, as if he wanted to agree but knew he couldn't. She laced her fingers through mine before turning her tear-filled eyes back to the police officer, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "I don't know how long it will take before I'm strong enough to tell this story without someone to support me. I don't even know if I can. I want you to catch them, and I want to help you do it. I want to know they can't touch me and that I'll be safe as soon as possible. Please, I feel like I have so little courage left. Let me tell this story before it's gone. I don't know when I'll be brave enough to attempt it again." She held his gaze for a moment before bowing her head in defeat. She looked so small and vulnerable all of a sudden. I found myself moving almost automatically to comfort and protect her. The words were out of my mouth before I could think. "I promised I won't let them hurt you again. They won't touch you, you will be safe." The police officer cleared his throat. "I think that if you'd like to make your statement with him present, under the circumstances, you can do so. Provided, of course, that Mr. Miller doesn't interrupt or interfere in any way." I felt her whole body relax in my arms. "Thank you." Her voice was fervent with relief. "Can you tell me what you remember?" the police officer asked carefully. Caitlin sat up, resting against me, both of her hands in mine. I felt her stiffen as she closed her eyes. "I remember they had a red Mercedes. They hit me, pushed me into the car, made me breathe something that knocked me out in the back seat. It was dark when I woke up. It was always dark and they hurt me. I remember pain and cold in the dark. And then Nathan telling me it was over, that they weren't going to hurt me again. The next thing I remember is waking up here." Her eyes opened, looking as lost as when she'd woken here and called for me. The officer looked stunned. "That's all you remember? Don't you remember being shot?" "No," she whispered, then cleared her throat and resumed in a more normal voice. "I have dreams, nightmares, and sometimes I see things that make me remember. Bits come back, but they're only ever bits. I should write them down, but I can't yet." She held up her bandaged hands. "I'll do it," I found myself saying. "I can bring in my laptop, you can tell me what you remember, and I'll type it in for you." I earned a suspicious look from the police officer, but Caitlin looked relieved. "Thank you," she said as she crumpled. She fell mostly against me, so it was a small matter to twist my fingers from hers and shift her so that she rested on her pillows. Her eyelids fluttered a little, but she didn't open her eyes. The officer stood up. "Well, if that's all you have to say today, I'll be going. Until next time, Miss Lockyer." Caitlin murmured quietly, her eyes still closed. He nodded to me, and I returned the curt gesture. He left, but I watched Caitlin. She hadn't shown any warning signs of feeling faint. I wondered if I should call a nurse. The door clicked shut behind the man, and I saw her go from rigid to relaxed. "Do you want me to call a nurse?" I tested. Caitlin breathed a sigh so deep it made her sink further into the pillows. "No, it's okay. I just need to rest." "You absolutely do," I replied. "Rest and heal. Tomorrow I'll bring in the laptop and you can tell me everything you remember." She sucked in a breath, but she didn't reply. 37. Dark. Labored breathing. Couldn't see. Touch. Skin on skin. So cold. Moaning. Coughing. Can't find a blanket. Cold. Need warmth. Blood. Silent scream. Can't. Die. Help. Need to run. Can't. Oh God. 38. Pervert. Sorry. Oh God, so sorry. Caitlin rubbed her cheek against her shoulder. A smear of tears turned the cotton from light blue to dark. Let me go. If I'd thought having to listen to her nightmares was bad, writing her memories was worse. I've never seen anyone cry as much as Caitlin did those first 2 hours. No reply, no light. More pain, bitter tears. Alone in the dark when I needed help. Her voice broke into a sob on the last word, but she hiccuped and continued. I remember lying down, sobbing. Cold, rough, hard concrete. Dusty. Made me cough but no one heard. Pain. Relief that no one heard me. She sat with her eyes closed, tears streaming down her face as she fought to find the words to describe the horrors she could remember. Disjointed memories, every one of them dark. Don't touch me. Hold her down, I said. Touch me and I'll kick your face in. How are you going to do that with him holding you down? I said. She swallowed painfully. No. I'd keep typing until she stopped, her sobs choking her into silence. Then I'd put an arm around her shoulder, she'd cry into my shirt for a while, she'd sit up, hiccuping, and she'd start again, presumably where she'd left off. Too heavy, couldn't breathe, hurt me, couldn't scream. Hurt me again. Gasping, sobbing, no air. Crushing weight lifted, a breath, another. Why a reprieve? Touching me. No. A scream, mine, hurt me more. It was like watching her throw up. Don't touch me, don't touch her, don't. Caitlin's voice failed. I waited, but she went on. Can't stop. Must shouting shots hurts? No. Can't stop. Must hurts? Can't get up. Must red light blood. Scared slipping. At first I thought I could take it, but what was coming out of her mouth and what it was doing to her made me sick to my stomach. TT took my clothes, tried to fight, threatened me. Scared, froze, cried, couldn't fight. So cold, shivering and cold in the dark. Two of them. By halfway through, I wanted to kill them all. B bound my hands, broke my fingers. Screaming pain. Couldn't see for tears. He had a knife, cut my clothes off. She swallowed. Tried to kick him. Couldn't see. Too dark. He caught my legs. Pushed them down, apart, unzipped. Oh God, please, no. By the time she'd been at it for a couple of hours and was so choked up she couldn't do it anymore, I was ready to not just kill them, but chop them up into small pieces and burn their remains in no particular order. Then burn the clothes I'd been wearing and take a shower in disinfectant. I asked Caitlin if she wanted to take a look at what I'd written, to add to it where I hadn't been able to type fast enough, but she shook her head, her eyes tightly closed. Later, she murmured. Another day. I can't any more today. She lay down again on the pillows and turned her face away from me. Did you want me to leave you alone for a bit? I asked hesitantly, already thinking about getting a nice coffee from the cafe downstairs and the possibility of any distraction to get the last 2 hours out of my head. I wondered how many sexy nurses and doctors visited the coffee shop. Please don't. The face Caitlin turned toward me now was wide-eyed with fear. I don't want to sleep again yet. I'm going to have nightmares after this. You're not the only one, I thought. I hesitated for a second before I offered, why don't you come downstairs and we'll get a coffee? There's a coffee shop downstairs and they had some nice-looking cakes this morning. I know the hospital staff don't let you have cake. She gave a tiny smile, looking wistful. Before she could refuse, I called the nurse's station to arrange a wheelchair and some theater scrubs for her to wear. As I hung up the phone, I looked down and realized I could do with a change too, out of my salt-encrusted shirt and into a clean one. I pulled the dirty one over my head and dug in my bag for clean clothes. I heard Caitlin make a sound behind me as she shifted between the sheets. I turned to see why. She was looking at the bathroom door, turned away from me. What is it? I asked, moving closer to her. She kept her face averted and pressed her lips together. She closed her eyes and shook her head. Nothing, she said softly. Are you sure? I asked, touching her arm. She shuddered and shrank away from me. Please, let me know when you're done changing your clothes. I looked down. It's not as if I'd suddenly sprouted a beer belly. I still had my six-pack, softened a bit by days in bed, but a six-pack I was proud of nonetheless. I resolved to work out a bit more when she was asleep. It was as I was looking down that I realized. Oh shit. This much bare skin made her uncomfortable. No bloody wonder. I crossed the room to the far corner by the window and turned my back to put my shirt on, so I didn't have to see her horror. How anyone thought I could ever seduce this girl was beyond me. Not a hope in hell. Nurse Judith came in before I could say anything else to Caitlin. The blonde nurse held the scrubs clenched in one fist as she told me, if you want a wheelchair for her, you'll have to go to the ward clerk at the nurse's station to find out where one is. She glared at me. Get out. I'm going to help her change. I looked askance at Caitlin, but she sat with her head down and her eyes closed, too miserable to react. I left the room but stood outside the door where I could still hear. Just because this nurse hadn't heard her before didn't mean she wasn't a danger today. He never leaves. The whole time you were unconscious, he barely left the room. He just kept talking to you. It didn't stop him trying to chat up the nurses though, sleazy bastard. Judith's disapproval of me was palpable. He sat in the chair by your bed and wouldn't leave, even when I was changing your dressings. Caitlin roused herself enough to reply, though her voice was muffled. Really? Why? Did he say? Judith sounded disgruntled. He said he'd promised you something and he wasn't letting you out of his sight. She evidently didn't believe it. Then I should thank him when he gets back, Caitlin said softly. Back. Oh shit. I strode down the ward to the nurse's station, asking as quietly as I could for a spare wheelchair I could borrow. The phone rang just as the ward clerk opened her mouth to answer me, so she pointed at one down the corridor as she picked up the receiver in her other hand. I grabbed the wheelchair and pushed it as quickly as I could back to Caitlin's hospital room. Thank you, Caitlin said quietly as I reached her room. Nurse Judith glared at me as she walked out of the door before I could go in, but she didn't say anything. Caitlin looked up at me hopefully. I lifted her into the wheelchair and we headed to the lift. It had to be the strangest first date I'd ever been on, with a girl wearing a pair of borrowed pajamas in public, drinking coffee through a straw while I spoon-fed her a slice of every cake they had, a grand total of 3. I didn't taste a bite of them and I couldn't even remember what they were when they were gone. The cafe speakers played some boy band I'd never heard of, but when I asked Caitlin to identify them for me, she didn't know either. We talked about music and movies, safe topics that stayed away from her nightmares. I lost track of both the time and the cake. I looked down to get her another bite to find all the cake was gone. Do you think we have time for another round before the staff upstairs realize I've kidnapped you and decide to report you missing? It took a moment for my horrified brain to catch up with my mouth. Oh God, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I looked up into her eyes and forgot whatever I'd meant to say. Her whole face lit up as she smiled and let out a peal of laughter that drowned out the anonymous boy band. So beautiful. Even the perky boy band agreed with me. I stared at her, mesmerized, dimly aware that other cafe patrons were looking at her too. For that moment I wanted what I couldn't have. She noticed people staring and blushed, looking down at her lap. I think I've had enough cake to last me for the next month, and I'm sure I'd hate to be reported missing. Please, could we go back upstairs? Her voice was barely audible. I babbled thoughtlessly as we waited for the lifts. I'm sure you were just making up for the last month. We'd have to come back and do this again to get you in credit for the next month. Nice. Remind her that those bastards starved her too. She stayed silent as I pushed her into the lift and back to her room. As I helped her back into bed, she smiled at me again to my surprise, although less brilliantly than before. "Perhaps, Nathan," she finally replied. "But not before tomorrow. I'll be sick if I have any more cake today." 39. Sweet smell to set stomach stirring. Sick or hungry? Not sure. Dizzy and dark. Here. Taste and texture, teeth sliding over skin. Crunch of apple, chewing, swallowing. Too fast to taste. Too hungry. Forcing food to stay down. Water. Cold and tasteless in a plastic cup. No whiff of chlorine. Not city water. Far from home. Far from help. No one nearby to hear me scream. Want more. More food. More water. More help. Please. 40. No breakfast for you, hon. A cancellation in the theaters moved your skin graft up to this morning, the unfamiliar nurse said briskly as she bustled in, sticking a sign on Caitlin's bedhead that read, "Nil by mouth." She swept out without another word. As if on cue, one of the smiling breakfast ladies entered, a tray on each arm, as she headed to where I sat beside Caitlin. I could smell bacon, burned toast and coffee, my stomach roaring audibly for all of it. I shook my head. "She has surgery today. I won't have any either." Caitlin looked up at me, her brow wrinkled. "Why not?" I tried to smile. "I don't want to throw up on the operating theater floor," I admitted. I felt queasy already. Comprehension broke like a wave over her face. "You mean you're coming in with me?" Her expression turned to amazement. I wondered if I'd stuck my foot in my mouth again. "Only if you want me there. They'll put you under and—" "Oh God." She shuddered and looked like she was having trouble swallowing. "Please, I do. I didn't realize they'd knock me out for it. I'll be asleep and they'll be touching me." Her voice died, horrified, into silence. My stomach settled a little as I reached out and carefully placed my hand on her arm. My little finger grazed the edge of the bandage on her wrist. I could feel her shaking as goosebumps formed under my fingers. I felt her fear. My mind rapidly clicked from conflicted to calm. I could do this for Caitlin. I'll be there. I'll scrub up and watch over you as you sleep until your eyes open in recovery. She was still so scared and stiff, but Caitlin managed a weak laugh. "You sound like some sort of sick stalker out of a movie for teenagers. Is there something wrong with me that I'm relieved to have you watch me sleep?" I joined her laughter, though mine had strength that hers lacked. "There's nothing wrong with you that time and rest won't fix after a little surgery today. You're going to be fine. I'll make sure of it. As long as I didn't throw up." Luckily, it wasn't long before an orderly collected her to be prepped for theater. I stayed beside her in the curtained cubicle they'd assigned her, while she waited for the anesthetist. She was already drowsy from the first set of drugs they'd given her as I'd looked on. I'd learned my lesson. I wasn't letting her take any more medication without knowing what it was and who gave it to her. Caitlin stretched out her hand to me, looking like a bemused drunk with her slight sleepy smile. "Will you be here when I wake up?" she slurred. I smiled. One day it'd be nice to go to the pub with her and see how many drinks it took to make her slur like this again. "Absolutely, Angel. Your own personal stalker." "Not a stalker," she mumbled. Further mumbling followed, but I didn't understand it. Her eyelids dropped. "Tell me that again," I said softly, not expecting her to respond. "They did. They were watching me. 3 of them. Don't know who was the bigger pervert." Her voice meandered off into a sigh. I strained to hear more. "I need space to work, mate," an unfamiliar voice said. I straightened up. The anesthetist had arrived. "You can see her when she's out of recovery, after surgery's over," he said, nodding to an orderly to start shifting Caitlin's bed. I panicked. "No, I'm going in with her. I swore I wouldn't leave her alone. I'm supposed to guard her. He snorted. Hope you've got a strong stomach then. This one's a skin graft and they're not pretty. Go scrub up and don't forget your shoe covers. He waved his security pass over the door behind him and kicked it open for me. I was torn between Caitlin and the gaping door. He waved his hand down his theatre blues. You can't go into theatre till you're a smurf like the rest of us. I'm taking her through and I'll see you in there. I gave in and forced myself to step into the changing room. The door closed heavily behind me, like a dungeon door that didn't open often. Feverishly, I looked around for the shelves of scrubs. It hadn't been that long since I'd done my med school pracs. Stripping off as quickly as I could, I tried not to think about having to wear the blue overalls again. I'd never expected to have to do it. That part of my life was done. Over. There would never be a Dr. Miller. That dream had died with Alana. Or on an autopsy table when they'd asked me to identify the body of my dead sister. Oh shit. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to think of anything but Alana. Caitlin. I was here for Caitlin. I struggled into the cotton clothes and found the disposables that finished off the costume. Shoe covers, cap, eye shield, mask. I put them all on and pushed the door to the theater open. I caught the faint whiff of fresh blood and disinfectant before I held my breath. I let it out slowly, striding across the room to Caitlin's head. Who's he? One masked figure asked another. The guard you're waiting for. Let's get this done. I want this procedure finished before coffee comes. Catering swore there'd be strawberry tarts today. Like we had yesterday, I thought as I looked down at Caitlin's sleeping face. Her beautiful eyes were closed, her hair covered by a cap, but her face was still a little worried. I reached for her hand, then thought better of it. I touched my fingers to her cheek instead. I'm here, I murmured. I'm not going anywhere. I forced myself to watch the bloody procedure, as a patch of skin was cut from one part of her leg and attached over the bullet wound on Caitlin's thigh. Somehow this was easier to bear than seeing her wounds revealed. Today was about helping her recover, a cosmetic patch over a gaping hole that shouldn't be there. That wouldn't be there if... Don't think about it. Keeping my breathing shallow, I tried to ignore the smells and sounds that were the same as any other operating theater I'd been in before Alana died. When I'd wanted to help people, not kill them. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus. They were almost done and she hadn't woken or cried out. Caitlin's breath was a slight breeze over my fingers. Breathe. She's alive. Keep her that way. I bit my lip so hard behind my mask that I could taste my own blood. Take her to recovery, a male voice said from between the two bloodied hands he held up. Wash up. Time for coffee. Pulling the shroud of paper and plastic off my head, I followed Caitlin out of the operating theater and down the stark, breezy corridor to recovery. I ripped the shoe covers off too, keeping my hand by her cheek as I hopped and struggled to keep up. I didn't struggle for long. The orderly left her bed under a patch of ceiling decorated with cheerful stickers for children. I glared at him, but he left without a word. I dropped my disposable stuff in the bin by the entrance and paced around her bed, waiting for Caitlin to wake up. There were no visitor chairs in recovery. You were either staff or a recovering patient. I felt drained from standing in readiness to calm Caitlin while forcing myself to watch my first surgical procedure since I'd dropped out of university. Since Alana had died. Since I'd sworn I'd hunt down the bastards who'd hurt her and... Caitlin. Right now my primary concern was Caitlin. There was nothing more I could do for Alana. Take care of Caitlin. I waited and watched, seeing slight movements as the drugs wore off. Caitlin woke up sooner than they said she would. Even the doctors underestimated her. Stop smiling at me, Caitlin mumbled. My eyes flew to her face. She glared at the ceiling. My eyes followed hers to the Disney characters I knew she despised. Death to Winnie the Pooh? I asked. Death and hell afterwards for enjoying my pain, she replied slowly. She shifted so that she could see me. You're all dressed up like the theater staff. You didn't perform the procedure, did you?" Her eyes were wide with worry. She didn't trust me. My heart hurt. Such a simple operation could have been done by an intern if I'd finished my degree. "No," I replied. "A qualified surgeon did your skin grafts. I watched to make sure you were okay, just like I said I would." She relaxed. "How did it go?" I smiled. "The doctors patched you up and you snored." Her brow wrinkled. "I don't snore." "What else?" I laughed. "The doctors are having strawberry tarts with their coffee today." She looked wistful. "I wish I could join them." "I can get you one as soon as you're cleared to go," I offered. "A doctor or a tart?" Caitlin asked, starting to smile. I stared at her, lost. Surely she couldn't be making fun of me. "You'll get a doctor to give you the all clear and then I can buy you cake," I began. Her breathy laugh shut me up. "Thank you, Nathan," she said softly, closing her eyes. Somehow I still felt like she was laughing at me. "Any time," I replied. I meant it too. 41. 4 of them. They all said they were called Chris. All sounded different. Hurt me differently. Too dark to see them. Didn't see their faces. Only the voices. Different voices, different hands. 4 different pricks who could only get a girl by force in the dark. Wanting to hurt them back. Kill them. Couldn't get free. So tired. Enough of my nightmares for today. You promised me cake, Nathan. 42. Want to watch some TV? I asked Caitlin. We were done with breakfast. I'd helped her in the bathroom while the trays were cleared away. I wasn't game to even mention the laptop. After her marathon effort 2 days ago, she'd agreed to try to tell me more yesterday, but it hadn't been long before she was too tired to talk. She nodded, and I hit the power on the remote. I flipped through the channels, hoping we wouldn't get stuck with any kids' shows. "Oh wait," she said suddenly. "That didn't look too bad." I blipped back to the one she indicated, with a bunch of people sitting in a helicopter. It looked familiar. "That one?" I settled into the chair beside her bed. "Is that Jurassic Park? I haven't seen that since I was a kid." Caitlin nodded, a slow smile appearing. "Nor have I." The smile faded fast. "Do you want to watch this?" I asked her, my fingers poised over the remote. I'd take all-day cartoons if it meant she wouldn't cry. She looked resigned. "Sure. It'll be fine." Her eyes were already on the screen. She folded her arms across her chest, pressing her lips together. I stared at her for a few minutes, just waiting. "What?" she asked finally, turning to me. I nodded at her crossed arms. "It doesn't look like you want to watch it. What's wrong?" I think she held out for another minute before she relented. The first time I saw it as a kid, I had nightmares about velociraptors for weeks. "Have you seen it since?" I probed. "No," she admitted. "But even the thought of them still freaks me out." I fought to keep the laughter out of my voice. "So you don't like this movie because you think you might have nightmares after watching it?" I tried to keep my face expressionless. "Yes," she replied defensively. "Nightmares worse than the one you told me about yesterday?" I asked gently, my eyes not leaving hers. Her face hardened. "No. Velociraptors sound like a picnic after what they did to me." Her voice faded from fierce to a barely audible whisper. She swallowed. "Bring on the dinosaurs. Watching them eat people will be fun." Her expression was fierce. I laughed. "Even the bloke on the toilet?" She struggled not to smile, but she gave in with a breathy laugh. Yes, even when the T-Rex eats the man on the toilet. She laughed properly. There aren't enough scary scenes in toilets. I grinned back. Yeah, because the world needs more crappy horror scenes. We both settled back to watch dinosaurs eat people, even the T-Rex with the toilet. I heard Caitlin's musical laughter again at that part and smiled to myself. Maybe she was finally recovering from her ordeal. As the movie progressed, my thoughts turned dark once more. If Caitlin was more scared of the men who'd hurt her than a pack of vicious, intelligent dinosaurs, then I needed to know what she knew, so I could hunt the bastards down. I resolved to try again later. I'd set up the laptop and ask her to tell me more as she cried and I tried to be a heartless bastard. Yeah, no. It could wait until tomorrow. Let her be happy for today. Oh wait. No, not tomorrow either. The next day. Tomorrow'd be her 18th birthday, and I didn't want to spoil it by upsetting her. The day after tomorrow then. 2 days of peace wouldn't be too much of a delay. It's not like the hospital was going to be overrun with velociraptors or vicious bastards, plus she'd been in surgery yesterday. She deserved a rest. She'd been unconscious for almost 2 weeks. What more could happen if we waited another 2 days? 43. The second I stepped out of the lift, I heard Caitlin's voice. I'd gone downstairs to get some flowers. It was her birthday after all, and I didn't know what else to get her. I sprinted down her ward to the sound of her screaming. Another nightmare, and I wasn't there to wake her from it. I hadn't been gone long, but I'd wanted to wake her with the sweet-scented flowers. Liliums, the florist had called them. Ah fuck, who cared what they were called? My feet pounded on the carpet as her screaming grew louder. Where in hell was her guard? Fuck, Naveed had been standing guard by her door when I left, drinking his coffee like his life depended on it. I skidded into the room to see the nightmare had become more real than it should have. She fought someone real. Someone I'd never seen before. Someone who should never have been allowed in. Leave her alone, I ordered, striding over to her. I threw the flowers into the sink, barely registering that there was already a bunch there. In shock, he let go of her, and Caitlin fell harmlessly back to the bed. I saw her eyes snap open, disoriented and scared. He was still too close to Caitlin, his eyes not leaving her. What did you do to her? I thundered, taking another step toward him. He started to back away, so I spared a glance at Caitlin. She blinked, lying there stunned. Then she saw him. Her eyes widened in shock. She didn't invite him, she was as surprised to see him as I was. I needed to get him away from her and out of here, so she'd be safe again. Get away from her. I didn't mean to scare you. I wanted, he began, but I cut him short with a fist to the face that he didn't see until it was too late. He was piss weak though, going down like a sack of surprise potatoes. I don't think he'd ever been in a fight before. He climbed awkwardly to his feet, backing away in the direction of the door. He looked at Caitlin. He saw something in her face that hardened some sort of resolve in him. Instead of leaving, his face firmed up and he tried to fight me. I dodged a few wild swings that didn't connect as I waited for the opportunity to lay this idiot out on the floor for the second time. This time, he wouldn't be getting up again. Right? I was forced to stop mid-swing as Caitlin stood between us. Oh God, she shouldn't be out of bed yet. She was shaking and I reached out to steady her at almost the same instant he did. Don't you dare touch me. She lifted a face contorted with fury. He immediately tore his hands away. He edged away from her. His eyes jerked from her hands and wrists to her ankles and feet, slowly dragging his gaze up to her thighs, his horror growing as he stared at her rainbow of bruises. The sheer sight of her was enough to incapacitate him, the useless idiot. Movement caught my eye and I saw a trickle of fresh blood pool beside her foot. A scarlet flower blossomed on her nightdress. The skin graft. She'd ripped her stitches. I needed to get her off her feet. Oh God, how much was this hurting her? How was she still standing? I want nothing to do with either of you if you're going to fight like animals. Get your hands off me." Her screech was directed at me. I only tightened my grip on her. I wasn't letting go, she'd fall without support. She was already visibly sagging with the effort. Or the blood loss. Or the pain. "Oh God, Caitlin. Don't do this. Not until you're back in bed. You can yell at me or him to your heart's content from there. I know how much pain this is costing you." The last part was spoken in a low voice in her ear as I lifted her in my arms. She curled up in pain, I could feel every muscle as tense as she could clench it, and she didn't relax when I set her down on her bed. She looked like she wanted to scream at how much it hurt, and it took every bit of her self-control not to. "I can get you more pain medication. I'll call a nurse, you don't need to hurt like this," I said urgently, praying he hadn't done anything else to her before I'd arrived. I ignored the bloke behind me, all of my attention focused on her, waiting for her reply. She turned away from me to speak to him, as if I didn't exist. "Jason." She sounded almost hypnotized. Something else scared me, and I was just shocked to be woken up. Her voice had gone deathly quiet. Tears flowed down her face, but still she sat rigidly upright, her eyes on him. She stretched out a hand to him, every finger bandaged and splintered. I turned so I could see his expression. His eyes were just about popping out of his head and he looked green as he gasped out, "Oh my God, what did they do to you?" He turned and fled. "No. Jason, wait," she called after him, but I doubt he heard her. When he didn't come back, she dropped back down on the pillows, her eyes closed. No more tears escaped her iron control. I crossed to the door of the room in time to see him stumble into the toilet at the end of the ward. I heard him retch as the door swung shut behind him. "He left in a hurry," Naveed said beside me, inclining his head toward the nauseous numbnuts. I stared at him. "Where were you? How the hell did he get into Caitlin's room?" I hissed as quietly as I could so Caitlin wouldn't hear me. He shrugged, far from fazed. "Call of nature. He's her friend, that girl Joe's brother. He's on the list. Of course I let him in. She had him there, you disappeared, and I've been up all night because my son's teething. I've had 2 coffees already this morning. I needed to take a piss." I wanted to break the calm expression on his face, but I knew he was a better fighter than me. I'd had 1 sparring session with him in the gym and I'd sworn never to do it again. Not ever, and not now either. Shaking my head, I headed back to Caitlin. "Is he coming back?" she asked, her eyes still closed. "No, he looked pretty sick," I answered. She sat up and shook her head. "He shouldn't have come. He faints at the sight of blood. What was he thinking?" "It's not as if there's that much blood," I thought sourly. Bloody wanker. He wouldn't have been any use to her on that beach. I tried to ignore the thought that followed it. I'd been shocked when I saw how badly injured she was too. I couldn't get away from her fast enough. But I'd promised. I wanted to hug her tightly, wishing I could forget. I opened my arms, offering. "No," Caitlin said, her hands up like a mime artist, showing me an invisible wall that I couldn't penetrate. Her face was set. I said, "Don't touch me." She took a deep breath. "What in hell did you think you were doing?" "I swore I wouldn't let anyone hurt you. He was touching you and you were screaming." I replied, louder than I meant to. I didn't regret punching the idiot. I wish I'd knocked him out with the first blow. "You swore you wouldn't let them hurt me again. That doesn't mean you pick fights with my friends." Caitlin sounded angry as all hell. "He never hurt me. My friends don't hurt me." She glared at me. "Right?" My hands itched to wrap around the neck of her green friend and choke the life out of him, but I swallowed painfully before I replied, "I'll never hurt you. I was trying to protect you. You know that, right?" Shit. She was going to kick me out for trying to keep her safe. Her expression softened the tiniest bit. "I know, but you're wasting your effort. Save the violence for the bastards who really deserve it." I didn't trust myself to say a word. I nodded fervently and looked away. My eyes landed on the bouquets in the sink. "I'll go get some vases for your flowers." I grabbed them. "Flowers?" Her question came out entirely devoid of emotion. "Flowers," I repeated, holding them out. "Happy birthday, Caitlin." Dragging my heavy heart with me, I left. 44. Forced kisses. A violation. The breath of a cruel mouth on mine. Smell of stale old beer. Like a pub the morning after a party. Pathetic and mean. Taste of ash. Dry hard lips. Dry tongue rough and forceful. Discarded. No. Passed to another. Now what? Arms closed. Still. Trapped. Going to hurt. No. 45. Today we'll take the dressings off your hands. Your fingers should have almost healed up by now. Nurse Judith sounded really pleased at the prospect. She started pulling the curtains around the bed, the rings scraping on the rail. "You out." I looked up to find the nurse glaring at me, jabbing her finger at the door. I was sitting fairly comfortably in the visitor's chair beside Caitlin's bed. We were watching a Simpsons rerun on her TV, and every time she laughed my heart felt a little lighter. Caitlin had barely spoken to me in 3 days, except when it was absolutely necessary, but this morning it seemed like she'd decided to forgive me a little. At least, she'd thanked me with a smile for helping her with breakfast. I still held out hope that she'd be happy to have me here in hospital with her. Maybe having her hands healed and whole would help. Hell, it'd make me feel better to know she was less helpless. I stood up so that I could look down on the grumpy nurse. She had no excuse to kick me out this time. Bearing Caitlin's hands was hardly R-rated, especially as I'd seen them in a far worse state than they'd be in today. In a month, her fingers had almost healed straight. I wanted to be there to celebrate with her, if she'd let me. I glanced at Caitlin to see if there was the slightest chance that she agreed with the nurse. If she didn't want me here, that was different. Caitlin looked at me fearfully, her eyes widening as panic seized her. "No, I want Nathan to stay," she managed to say. Her eyes said please when her mouth was silent. With a slight nod to Caitlin and a shrug to the blonde nurse, I sat down again. Caitlin leaned closer to me and I placed an arm lightly on the pillows behind her, around but not quite touching her shoulders, ready to take it away if she objected. To my surprise, she relaxed into my embrace as she held out her hands to the nurse. "Do it," Caitlin said, swallowing hard. I felt her tense as the nurse took hold of her right hand, the one farther away from me. The nurse freed Caitlin's hands as if she were eagerly unwrapping a fragile gift while wanting to preserve the paper. She peeled the gauze away with deft fingers and pulled off the splints. I almost didn't realize when Caitlin's fingers were bare. I thought I was looking at another layer of bandages. Pale, thin and white, her fingers were like brittle, petrified sticks of driftwood. Nurse Judith's hands were as pale as her complexion, but they looked in the pink of health beneath Caitlin's damaged digits. I ached to hold Caitlin's delicate hand in mine, but I couldn't say why. "Okay, let's see how well you can move these. Just bend them one at a time," the nurse coaxed. I held my breath, my eyes on each finger as it curled up like a salted slug before straightening again. Her thumb looked fine, as did her index finger. Only her middle finger provoked a grimace of pain as Caitlin tried to curl it into her palm. "Good," cooed the nurse, nodding her approval. "Well, 4 out of 5 healing perfectly is good. You might have trouble with that middle one, but I'm sure you won't need it. You might even be nicer to us nurses." Caitlin's face broke into a beaming smile as she flipped the finger at the nurse. Nurse Judith looked put out. "Maybe not." Caitlin laughed. "I'm always nice to nurses, except when they tell me I'm not going to recover. I'll be fine. You'll see." The nurse sighed. "Yup, another arrogant doctor." She held out her hand and Caitlin placed her left hand in the grumpy woman's clutches. She rested her right hand on the sheet, where it blended in like a pale spider. I fought the urge to take her hand in mine as she wiggled her fingers absently. "And the other hand?" Nurse Judith asked expectantly. Both Caitlin and I looked at her fragile left hand. This time she bent all her fingers at once like a spider curling up to die, before spreading them out straight. Some of them didn't straighten completely. Some stiffness, she mused. But better. She placed both hands side by side in her lap. "Physio with finger exercises next. Won't that be fun?" She moved her fingers, simulating typing on a keyboard. Soon she'd be able to type up her own nightmares. She wouldn't need my help, and I'd have to ask her to tell me before she sent me away. Soon. I didn't know whether to be happy for her freedom or sad for mine. "Here, I'll help you wash your hands," I heard Nurse Judith say, bringing my mind back to the two women in front of me. The nurse carefully wiped Caitlin's hands with a face washer from the bathroom and helped her dry them on a towel. She threw them both into a bag for dirty linen in the corner and leaned in closer to Caitlin. "Do you want me to go see if I can get some bubbly from the kitchen?" Caitlin shook her head. "I don't believe there's any alcohol for drinking in a hospital." Nurse Judith winked. "There is, for the candlelight dinners in the maternity ward. I'll go get you some and you can toast having your hands back." She headed out of the room. I shifted out of the visitor's chair and perched on the edge of Caitlin's bed. She had a big smile on her face as she looked down at her hands. I couldn't help smiling. I'd never seen her look so happy. "Congratulations," I said. She lifted her eyes so she smiled at me. She held out her hands as if she was drying nail polish. Her hands were trembling a little and I reached out to take hers in mine. Words couldn't describe how relieved I was that her hands had healed okay. I wanted to shake her hand, but even the slightest pressure of my fingers had her trying to pull out of my grasp, so I stopped. Light-headed, I did something silly. I touched my lips to the back of first one hand, then the other. Her hands were warm and moist, like I imagined her lips would feel after she'd just had a sip of coffee. Caitlin laughed, breaking into my reverie, her eyes puzzled. "What was that for?" she asked. I forced a smile, trying to make my tone light. "I'm not sure. It just seemed like the right thing to do." And now what I wanted to do most was kiss her properly, but not on her hands. There's a stupid idea. I let go of her and turned away to look out of the window. I looked in vain for the spider in her corner web, but all I saw was the image of Caitlin's ghostly hands spread across my vision, finally free. 46. I remember waking up and it was dark. Still groggy from the drugs, I couldn't see. My head hurt. I was tied up. My body resting on cold concrete. I felt bruised, not knowing how long I'd lain there. Shifting. Something harder by my hip. They didn't. They did. They missed it. Let me keep it. Stupid. Thank you. Must reach it to free myself. Painfully twisting, trying to reach my pocket. Need something sharp. Shoulders burning, straining, reaching. Fingertips found plastic. Now for something sharp. Tiny scissors, slow but safer than a knife. Didn't want to risk hurting my hands with the big blade. Slicing strands, sawing, then my hands were free. Slipping the card back into my pocket. Just in case. Dizzy when I stood up. Angry voices in the dark. Shouting at Chris. A door opened and there was light. I ran for it, trying to push past the standing shape in the doorway. Room swirling into darkness again. I was falling. His hands on me. He caught me so I didn't fall. Helping. He offered me food and water. Something for the pain. Help. But not enough. 47. Caitlin sat at the window, her hand a pale spider on the glass, her eyes scanning the lake and the gardens below. She sat so long without moving that I thought she'd fallen asleep until she spoke. "What's the date, Nathan?" "It's September, isn't it?" She didn't look away from the window. I admitted that I didn't know the exact date, but that, yes, it was September. The last time I was outside in daylight it was still winter. Now it's spring. She heaved a big sigh and turned her dark eyes on me. "I want to see the flowers." "I'll bring you any flowers you want. I'll fill your room with them as long as I can keep you safe." I looked at the bin in the corner, which now held the remains of her birthday flowers. Mine had outlasted Jason's, but only by a day. "I don't know if it's a good idea to leave the hospital yet," I hedged. "Maybe after you've been discharged, it can't be long." "The gardens downstairs are still hospital grounds," she stated. "And I've seen at least 2 patients walking around in them. I think they were smoking." "So you want to go downstairs and inhale lots of passive cigarette smoke?" That was the least of my concerns. I was worried about the difficulty of keeping her safe in the grounds, with their winding paths and spots where you were invisible to most eyes. What if one of the smokers is actually one of your attackers waiting for a second chance? "Then I'll have to run them over," she said softly, her voice muffled. "Anyway, only one of them smoked and he's dead." I lost interest in what she was saying, watching in fascination as she struggled out of the hospital gown and into her borrowed surgical scrubs. Her hands were paler than the rest of her skin between the dressings, but the dressings were far fewer than they'd initially been. Her back looked smooth, the curve of her shoulders down to her spine unmarred by any gauze now. There were scars, of course, but these were starting to fade. She let out a whimper as she pulled the V-neck shirt over her head. I tensed, waiting. I knew something must have hurt her, but she seemed determined not to ask for help. I watched as she arched her back, pulling the pants on over the patch on her thigh where the stitches had been removed only yesterday. She whimpered a little more, then gritted her teeth and dragged the pants up to her waist. She saw me watching, but didn't say anything until she'd finished. "You could have averted your eyes. It's considered polite." "I could have, but you should have asked me for help," I returned, keeping my voice even. "If you'd wanted privacy you could have changed in the bathroom, or closed the curtains around your bed." She wouldn't admit that she couldn't do either of those, I realized. Nor would she ask for help. I wished I'd done what any normal person would have and looked away, instead of waiting for her to stop and ask me for help. Then maybe I wouldn't have felt like such a pervert, watching an injured girl struggle to dress herself. I wanted to apologize. Caitlin wasn't listening. She eyed the wheelchair outside her room, much further than she could walk unaided. She stood up carefully, clamping her mouth shut. She took a step, her face white from the effort, but her eyes spoke volumes about pain. My heart felt crushed like a Coke can. I could almost hear the sound of it crunching in her clenched fist. "Don't do this to yourself, Angel, it's painful to watch." I gave in, standing up and moving to bar her way before she took another step. For a moment she looked up at me, determined not to be cowed, but the pain was too much for her, and she closed her eyes as she crumpled. I was ready. I had my arms around her, supporting her weight before she could hit the floor. I lifted her and carried her back to where she'd been sitting on the edge of her bed. "You don't need to fight me," I said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you. Save your energy so you can recover for when you do need to fight." She was still pale, shaking where she sat. Even as she opened her eyes, they looked down and wouldn't meet mine. I sank to a crouch in front of her on the floor. "If you don't recover, they win." She stared at me. "I'm getting better." I dropped my voice lower, aiming to be persuasive. "If you let me help you, you'll get better faster. And it won't hurt as much either." "I'm not asking for your help. You know I won't." Stubbornly, she pressed her lips together and looked away. I couldn't charm her. Maybe I could shock it out of her. Not like I'd get anything any other way. "Who helped you before, Caitlin? Who brought you food, water, medicine? Someone helped you survive." I kept my voice low, so only she could hear me. She looked back at me shocked, swallowing convulsively before closing her eyes. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Someone who didn't wait for me to ask. Someone kind. Someone I haven't talked about. Stubborn little thing, I thought, jubilant that she told me more than anyone else and uneasy that she could remember so much. How much more had she remembered that I didn't know? It's polite to wait till you ask. But even if you're not going to ask, I'm still going to try to help you. I won't let them win. Her eyes were still closed, so I couldn't tell what her reaction was. Yet my eyes never left her face. I want to go outside. Her voice surprised me. Something in her expression said I couldn't stop her. And how are you going to get there? I asked. She looked across the corridor. I'm going to reach that wheelchair, then I'm going to use it to go down in the lift and outside. What if you fall again? I asked her. She bit her lip. Then I'll crawl. I believed her. But the mental image of her crawling commando style across the floor was pretty damn funny. How will you push the wheelchair? I struggled to keep a straight face. She held out her hands, which shook slightly even as she tried to hold them still. I can use my hands a little. It's downhill from the front entrance to the gardens, so that should be easy. How will you get back up the hill to the hospital? I asked her. She lifted her chin. I'll wait until someone offers me a hand. What if no one else is out there to make the offer? She bit her lip again. Then I'll wait for security to come looking for me. At the thought of her waiting in the garden until security came looking for her, I laughed. I couldn't think of her doing anything more senseless when it came to her own safety, and Caitlin wasn't that stupid. Or you could ask me to come with you, I suggested as I lifted her from the bed and over to the wheelchair. Thank you, she said softly, looking down. Hesitantly, she placed her hands on the wheels and I held my breath. I didn't want her fragile fingers getting hurt all over again, struggling to handle a wheelchair. I couldn't keep up this show of indifference. If she went without me, I was damn well going to follow her to make sure she stayed safe. Caitlin looked up at me, smiling impishly. So, are you coming? My face lifted with a smile, taking my heart up with it. Sure, I said. The downhill path goes all the way through the garden to the lake. Someone's going to have to be there to fish you out. She stared at me in disbelief. You'll see. I shrugged, starting to push her down the corridor to the lift. I was bloody glad she couldn't see my face, because I couldn't keep the grin off it. She trusted me more than anyone else and she still wanted me around. 48. When we reached the lake, Caitlin started to laugh. I helped her sit on a bench by the edge of the water. She stretched her bare foot out, but we were too far away for her toes to reach the murky brown surface. She pulled her foot back quickly, her toes lightly brushing the grass beneath the seat. So, are you going in? I asked her, nodding at the water. She laughed a little more. No, it's cold and dirty. I'll leave the lake for the ducks and the fish. More soberly, she continued, and I'm not sure if I should even consider swimming yet. I'd probably have to recover more before I could swim, or even go in the water. She stared out over the lake, her fingers resting on the cotton covering the transplanted skin on her thigh. I sat beside her in silence, waiting for her to break it. Oh look, she cried suddenly, pointing across the lake. I could see ripples on the surface but nothing remarkable, and I said as much. Ducklings, look, 4 of them. She pointed again, counting them for me. I could barely discern something small and brown on top of the ripples. She looked at me hopefully. Can we go to the other side of the lake to see them better? I lifted her back into the wheelchair and pushed her to the paths on the other side of the lake, where they became the maze I'd been trying to avoid. As we reached the far side, we could see the little ducks climbing up beside the waterfall that fed the lake, into the garden bed above. Full of misgivings, I took her further along one of the paths, into the gardens where the ducklings had disappeared. Around a corner we found a small pond, hidden from view by manicured hedges, where an adult duck swam with a whole family of ducklings. There must have been at least 10 of them. Caitlin dropped to her knees beside the pond and sat motionless, entranced by the small fluffy things floating on the surface of the water. I stood near her, mesmerized by the smile on her face as she watched the ducks. I still had enough presence of mind to look around every few minutes, worried for her safety. I heard their voices before I saw them. I give it another hour or two. Then it's pretty much getting dark when I give up till tomorrow, one drawled. So if I stay 5 minutes longer than you and I spot her, I get her all to myself, the second taunted. If she comes out, all the hospital will say is that she's in a critical condition, no visitors, but it's been weeks. What makes you think it'll be today? Why today or any other day? No one's critical for weeks. Either she's dead or she'll be discharged any day. Bet you a beer it's today. Two sounded bored. I heard the repeated scrape and click of a lighter, but he was too far away for me to smell the smoke from his cigarette. Okay. Bet you a coffee she's not as pretty as all the pictures. One of the voices faded as he moved down the path away from us. Angel, I leaned down to say in a low voice beside her ear, are you ready to give press interviews yet? She looked up at me in surprise. Interviews? There's a press crew around, waiting for you. I heard them talking. She went pale, her smile evaporating. I don't want to, oh hell not yet. Time to go back inside then. I held out my arms, ready to help her up. She looked wistful. We're pretty well hidden here. We could stay and hope they'll just go away. Against my better judgment, I gave in, with conditions. If they do see us, I'll get you inside as fast as I can. Okay. She looked up at me with inviting eyes, her eager smile back. Oh come on, they're so cute. Take a look at the baby ducks. I've never seen ducklings this close before. I watched the ducklings scoot around the pond for a few moments, before turning my attention back to her. She looked so happy, as if there were nothing else on her mind at all. As if none of this had ever happened. I looked around again, more as a precaution than any feeling that it was necessary. Sunlight glinted off something. It took me a second to realize it was a camera lens. Time to go, Angel, I told her. Look, they're taking photos of us. I lifted her back to the wheelchair, and started to push her up the shortest path to the hospital entrance. Wait! I heard the shout behind me. Please, I just want to ask a few questions. Do you want to answer them, Angel? I asked her, walking as fast as I could with her. No. She sounded scared. I broke into a run as we approached the doors, trying to get her to the lifts before they could follow us. I caught the eye of the security guard as we sped past. I jerked my head in the direction of the reporters following us and he nodded, moving to the entrance to bar their way. We made it into a lift just before the doors closed and traveled back up to her floor in silence. Too out of breath to say anything, I helped Caitlin back to her room and into her bed before I collapsed into the chair beside her. I grabbed for the water jug, sloshing water into a glass and gulping most of it down as I struggled to catch my breath. Why would any reporter want to interview me? Caitlin asked, bewildered. I looked up from my glass to her, wondering if she was joking. The missing girl back from the dead? When anyone else would have died? You're a real-life Harry Potter, look. I rummaged through the pocket of the laptop bag and pulled out the newspaper I'd kept from that first morning in hospital. An old photo of her, taken before she went missing, smiled from the front page, above the headline Caitlin found. The article itself was short, telling how her body had been discovered on a southwest beach early that morning where she'd been left to die, before she'd been transported to a hospital in Perth where she remained in a critical condition. Caitlin looked at the article, still puzzled. This is all the press has on you, I told her. The police won't tell them anything else. They want an interview with you, but the hospital won't give out any more information either. But I don't want to talk about it. Why would they care about me? I laughed. Because you're news. They've had almost daily features with lots of pictures of you while you were missing, hoping someone would come out with information that would help the police find you. Now someone's found you and they want to know all about it." I paused. "It probably helps that you look good in photographs." "What will they do now when they took photos but didn't get any answers?" "Print the pictures and make something up." I smiled broadly. "We should read the paper tomorrow." "And I'll keep that one too," I thought but didn't say. "I'll go speak to security and make sure you don't get any visitors or phone calls you don't want." 49. "Well, that's fucking useless. You and her on the front cover of the West, what's the point trying to hide her now? And you've learned what exactly?" I winced, wishing I hadn't called in my report. But it was better than receiving an angry phone call when tomorrow's paper had my picture in it. She's told me what she remembers, but it's all vague and hazy. There were 4 men who hurt her. She heard the name Chris, the red Mercedes, being tied up in the dark, repeated abuse, the names cut into her skin. I swallowed, finding it hard to continue. "Most of that we already knew before she woke up." "New info, Nathan. What has she told you to help us find them?" "They held her outside the city, somewhere outside of any town. The water they gave her to drink wasn't chlorinated city water. She didn't hear any sounds from outside, so it was well insulated or isolated," I said quickly, trying to tell every tiny detail. "I think she knows a lot more, but she needs someone to help her remember it. That takes time and—" "Well, you're out of fucking time now. Unless she spills her guts to you in the next hour or two, it's time for a change of plan." I heard a slurp, as if he was drinking coffee. "What change of plan?" I asked uneasily. "None of them are stupid enough to come after her in hospital. So she's going home. Maybe they'll target her there." He sounded completely unfazed. "Better than a month of close surveillance with nothing to show for it, which is what we have now." "You're going to leave Caitlin unprotected and use her as bait for those bastards?" I blurted out, horrified. "Now, no name-calling. They're fucking potential terror suspects. The girl would be dead anyway if it weren't for your intervention, and by all accounts, including yours, she's pretty damn damaged anyway, so it's a small risk compared to what else and who else could be at stake if we don't get them." I heard his business-like tone, but it sounded pretty fucking callous to me. "She's not damaged. She's recovering." "You mean I saved her life only to risk it again to catch the potential terror suspects who tried to kill her the first time? I can't ask her to do that. She'll never agree to be bait in a trap. Especially not if it means they'll get near her again." I barked into my phone. Some hospital visitors carrying flowers looked at me in alarm, before hurrying off down the ward. "Fuck, Nathan, you're not stupid enough to think we're going to tell her, are you? She'll go home and we'll just keep an eye out for anyone suspicious approaching her house. We'll send a team in and we'll have our suspects." He laughed. I wanted to smash his phone through his teeth. Maybe calling in reports wasn't such a bad thing after all. I'd hate to find out what ASIO would do to me for punching my superior in the face. I tried to keep my voice down, but it was bloody hard. And what if our team is slow and doesn't get there in time? What if they reach Caitlin before we can stop them? He'd stopped laughing. "That's a risk we'll have to take. If she won't tell us what we need to know, then she's more valuable as a possible target than as a source of information. Don't make this personal, Nathan. She's not your sister. She's a girl you barely know." I lost it. "Yes, sir, I know Caitlin's not one of my sisters, because Alana died in a lot of pain at the hands of your suspects, and Chris will be next if we don't find them. Caitlin's the miracle girl who managed to survive, despite everything they did to her. We owe her for any info she can give us on the suspects. I owe her if she can help me keep them from Chris." My voice broke. "Please, let me stay with her for another week or two, in case I notice anything the surveillance guys don't pick up. Maybe she'll tell me more and we can still go with the original plan, finding out where they are so we can arrest them before they reach her." "What'll you do if I say no?" He sounded amused, but it wasn't fucking funny. "I'll obey orders and let Caitlin die?" Ignore my orders and protect her anyway? Beg you to change your mind? Shoot her myself because it's more humane than what they'll do to her? I'll take personal leave and do what I can on my own time." There was silence, then another slurp. "You have 2 more weeks tops. But you tell her nothing about who you work for or that she's under surveillance. I want her to look scared and worried, like an easy target. You'll have to use every bit of your charm on this one if you expect her to let you live in her house." He took a deep breath. "Fuck. Good luck keeping her alive, Nathan. It'll be bloody bad press for our department if we manage to accidentally kill the girl on the front cover of tomorrow's West." Oh shit. My charm wasn't worth shit with Caitlin. And she'd never survive without me. "I'll do my utmost," I swore, desperately hoping it would be enough to keep Caitlin alive. "You do that," he said before he hung up. I let out a long-held breath, wondering what the chances were of me not fucking this up. Slim to none was my best guess. And I was betting with Caitlin's life. The stakes were far too high for me, and I couldn't even tell her what I'd done. Fuck, I wouldn't want to either. If I failed, she'd kill me. 50. She'd had her fingers free for 2 days, so they discharged Caitlin that afternoon before any more press turned up. I offered to give her a lift home right away and, rather than have to call anyone else and wait longer, she accepted. Now that her stitches were out, she could walk a little, but I was the one who walked alongside the unfamiliar nurse pushing her wheelchair. She was slow, but I kept pace with them until we reached the outside doors. I saw Michael take up his position on a couch in the foyer. He nodded to me once before turning his eyes back to Caitlin. Secure in the knowledge that she was under surveillance still and she'd be safe till I returned, I asked Caitlin to wait while I brought the car to her. She nodded and shifted to a seat by the door, before the nurse whisked the wheelchair back inside. I set off across the car park, my swift strides carrying me quickly across the tarmac. Surveillance or not, I didn't want to leave Caitlin alone for long. I pulled the car up under the portico at the entrance, but there was an ambulance in my way. I could see Caitlin sitting on the bench beside it, looking little and vulnerable. She stared at the paving below her dangling feet, for the bench was too high for her toes to touch the ground. She wore clothes I'd hurriedly bought from the nearest supermarket, and they didn't fit her. Even the cheap pair of thongs hung from her feet, a few centimeters of green foam rubber clearly visible past her heels. An abandoned waif in oversized clothing, looking as lonely as if she'd been left there for good. My heart ached for her as I waited and watched. Michael caught my eye and nodded again as he stood up. He stuck his magazine under his arm and marched out of the hospital, without another glance at Caitlin or me. His watch was over for the day, now it was my responsibility to get her home, before the next surveillance shift started at her house. I waited patiently until the ambulance officers headed off. I drove into the space they'd sat in, right in front of Caitlin. From forlorn to frantic, the change was as sudden as cutting the car's engine. I stopped and she panicked, lurching to her feet and nearly tripping as she tried to retreat inside the hospital foyer. I got out of the car, running around to her. "Caitlin, what's wrong? What are you doing?" She shook her head. "They're not going to take me back. I'll die first." I looked around wildly, scanning the car park for any sign of danger, but I saw none. What had she seen that I'd missed? I approached her slowly, but she shrank away, backing up against the window beside the automatic doors. "I won't get into their car again. Not you, you can't take me back." Her eyes were huge with horror. "Their car? My car? Oh fuck, I forgot about the car." I stood in front of her now, shaping my expression into a smile to mask my desire to smack myself in the head for being so stupid. "It's not their car. It's mine." "No, I trusted you." I started to understand the extent of her terror. Through the glass behind her, I saw the hospital security guard speaking to the receptionist as she pointed urgently at us. He turned to look and started toward the entrance, looking grim. He wasn't the guard who'd been on duty that morning, keeping the reporters from Caitlin. This was a new bloke who didn't know me or her, and this scene looked bad from any perspective. Oh shit. Every instinct went against it, but I forced myself to back away from her, my hands up in a gesture of surrender. Behind her, one security guard had become two, and the newcomer knew me on sight, not least of all from his help that morning. I could see him speaking urgently to the first bloke, his hands waving wildly as he shook his head. The helpful one. I struggled to remember his name. I knew I'd spoken to him before, and he'd had a distinct accent. Sam? No, Sean. The dark-haired Irish bloke. Sean, the security guard, looked inquiringly at me, and I gave a slight nod, which he returned, walking away. His colleague looked grumpy, but headed away too. Right, that sordid security escorting me off the premises and leaving Caitlin with no one else to watch over her. I still had to get her into the car and home. Looking at Caitlin again, I pointed at the bench. I'm going to sit down. If you want, you can join me, I told her evenly as I took careful steps to the bench and plonked my bum on it. She was slower to move, but it was only a few seconds before she slumped down heavily on the bench next to me. I regretted letting her stay on her feet so long. She looked pale and clammy already. This is my car. It's been my car since I turned 21 and my parents bought it for me for my birthday, I said steadily. Yeah, they'd bought me a blocky conservative car that said I had money but couldn't take off fast, for that wouldn't mean a smooth ride in the luxury bloody sedan. It had a comfortable back seat though that had seen some use. I shut that thought down before it went any further. Focus. Caitlin. She stared at it, licking her lips nervously. They had a car just like this one. They pulled me into it and drove me there, and… She gulped back tears, not wanting to finish her sentence. Check the number plate if you like. Then you'll see they probably just had the same car as I do. If you know the number plate, now's the time to tell me. She shook her head. I never saw the number plate. I wouldn't know. Would you like to check the car? I'll pop the bonnet and the boot and open all the doors. If you find any of them, I will happily beat the crap out of them for you, with the tire iron even, I offered cheerfully. Behind my back I crossed my fingers, desperate for any luck I could get. She let out a held breath and laughed, a little nervously, but it was a laugh nonetheless. But, you swear you don't work for them? She smiled as she spoke, as if she felt silly even voicing the words. I did my best to take her question seriously, clearing my throat before I replied, no. And even if I had, I'd say that arrangement would have ended about the time one of them decided to try and kill me on that beach where I found you. I paused and held out my hand. Would you still like a lift home? Don't get into cars with strangers. No one knew that better than Caitlin. God, I wish I had half the courage it took her to do it again after what happened the first time. Her breath hissed through her teeth as she gave me a frightened smile. Yes. Could you help me to the car too, please? I think I've had about all the walking I can take today. 51. Waking up on sand. Don't know how I got there. Not dark anymore. Stars. Clouds. Moon. West over the water. My hands. Not my hands. Trust me. So cold. Indistinct voices. Couldn't focus. Don't remember. Don't remember shouting, fighting. No warning. Gunshots, more than one in quick succession. It's over. Bright light, strangers. Scared. Police shouting, warning, shooting. One shot. Me screaming. Why don't I remember? 52. Caitlin glanced at the back seat as I lifted her through the passenger side door. I didn't follow her gaze. I knew no one had left underwear or anything else incriminating there. The last girl who'd lain on my back seat hadn't been wearing any underwear. I cut that thought short. This was hardly the time. I turned my eyes back to Caitlin's worried ones. Guessing her thoughts, I told her, You have a window that you can open if you want to, and a door you can leave by if you decide you don't want to be in the car. Just give me a bit of warning on the freeway, so I can pull into the emergency stopping lane before you get out." I shut the door for her and strode to my own side of the car, sliding into the seat easily as if nothing was wrong. Caitlin clicked the seatbelt into place and clutched at it with white-knuckled fingers of fear. "Saucer eyes," she murmured. She closed her eyes as if struggling to remember something. I started the car, trying harder to forget. The first time I saw her. The red car parked on the side of the road, windows down. A spiral of smoke wafting out of the open window, the smell of the cigarette carried away on the winter wind. Watching as they did the same. There were plenty of people around. Commuters in suits, tradesmen in fluorescent shirts from the construction site nearby, and casually dressed students on their way to university. The intermittent clicking from the crosswalk lights to the east. A ranting religious man handing out flyers, trying to save people from the end of the world. Couldn't save her. A moving curtain of darkness in the light breeze turned to deep red wine in the sunlight. It was her hair I saw first, drawing my eye to the rest of her. She walked close to the curb, a cheerful smile on her face, her loose hair rippling and catching the light. She wore a blinding white t-shirt that proclaimed she was an angel. The faint outline of her nipples punctuated the word through the cotton in the cold wind, calling the proclamation into question. An angel, but an earthly one without wings, unless they were attached to her feet. Her every step was fluid, graceful, as if she were dancing through the crowd of people, from paving stone to paving stone. I stopped watching them. I only had eyes for her. I thought she was the most incredible girl I'd ever seen, and I wanted her, my angel, like I'd never wanted anyone or anything else before. God, even the memory was torture, seeing how much she'd changed. What did I want to do to her? Hell, anything she asked me to. She was that stunning. Of course they saw her. Of the hundreds of people walking down the terrace, they had to pick her. Someone spoke to her before getting out of the car. She said something else and opened the back door. For a moment, Caitlin's face lit up with a beautiful heart-stopping smile as she leaned down to speak to someone inside. I was mesmerized, caught up in half-formed fantasies about what I wanted to do with this girl. Precious seconds that I couldn't afford to lose. Seconds that could have cost Caitlin everything. Caitlin's smile slid into a look of horror as she hit her and pushed her in. For a moment her dark eyes held mine and they screamed help. But her lips didn't move or make a sound, sunlight catching on shiny lipstick the same color as the scars on her wrists now. The flick of her dark hair before it swung out of sight. The slam of the door behind her. The blur of the driver running around, closing the driver's side door and starting the engine. The roar of it revving as the flash of orange indicated they were going to move. A cigarette butt thrown out of the window. Sparks on the paving as the mirror-tinted glass blocked my view, sliding smoothly up like a Mercedes window should. I'd wanted to step in, stop them and help her, no matter what I was supposed to do. But I was too slow emerging from my daydream into her nightmare. It was too late. The car had already driven away with the angel inside who'd never be mine. Now my knuckles were whiter than hers, my nails digging deep into the soft leather steering wheel. I glanced at Caitlin, but her face was turned away from me, staring out the window. Now that she was wearing a long-sleeved jumper with long pants, it was hard to tell she was injured at all. "You look so much better in clothes," I blurted out before I realized what I'd said. Oh hell, I didn't mean. I almost said that I hadn't been fantasizing about her naked, but that wasn't entirely true. I'd been remembering just such a fantasy the first time I'd seen her. I'd since seen her wearing nothing but blood. I'd give anything to forget that night. She still didn't look at me, as if she hadn't heard. I reached over and touched her cheek. My fingers came away wet with tears. I swore, then took her hand. "Caitlin, it's over. They can't touch you anymore." I paused. "Or are you upset that I was checking you out?" She laughed through her tears, wiped her eyes and met mine. "I'm going to be all right." She was forceful, more to herself than to me. "Please, can you take me home now?" 53. Sneezing. Searching through a full bag for a tissue. Felt the spider crawl of someone's eyes on me. A woman staring out of her car window. Walking past her. She got out of the car. I looked at the car to avoid looking back at her. Bright red paint, shiny wheels. Nice car. I looked up at her face. Her friend. Wanted to talk to me. Opening the door from bright sunlight to darkness. Help me. Eyes met mine and understood. Too late. 54. The only conversation in the car was the English accent of my GPS directing me dispassionately from the hospital to Caitlin's house. My part in the conversation was to listen and do as she said. Caitlin stared out the window for the whole trip. When we pulled into her driveway, I had to call her name a few times to get her attention. She said, sounding far away. You're home, I said softly. I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened my car door. My shoe scuffed and scraped the concrete driveway. I was too tired to lift my feet further as I crossed slowly to her side of the car. I had her door open before she'd even taken off her seatbelt. Her expression was troubled. Even though her eyes were directed at mine, she didn't seem to see me. She looked lost in a memory. I touched her now dry cheek. You're home, I repeated. Home, she murmured, as if she couldn't remember the meaning of the word. She blinked and her eyes cleared, focusing on me. Thank you, Nathan. She let me help her from the car. I slammed the door behind her. I will never like this car, she said quietly, still looking troubled. I tried not to laugh. I never had, either. Maybe it was time to buy something new. She started to take slow, deliberate steps to the front door. I froze for a second before I rushed to help her. She couldn't make it from the car to the door by herself yet, even with the strong pain medication still in her system. I helped her extract the spare key from its hiding place and unlock the front door, holding it open to let her inside. I followed her in and dropped her meager bag of belongings on the tiles, alongside Alana's laptop. Her eyes followed mine to the bags on the floor. You can use my sister's laptop for as long as you need to, I said, and she nodded. We both stood in the entry, suddenly awkward. She wanted to be alone. She was finally home. I knew all this, but that didn't stop me from asking her anyway. I wanted to stay to watch over her, to make sure she was okay. Do you want me to stay? I asked as she spoke. Did you want to have dinner here, or do you have something planned at home? We both laughed nervously. It was fucking stupid to drive her in that car, knowing the memories a Mercedes held for her. The last thing she wanted was to have me in her house reminding her of the atrocities committed against her. She needed to forget. I jumped in before she had time to invent an excuse to support her refusal. I already knew I didn't belong here. You should probably have a rest, maybe even a couple of hours sleep, and I'd stop you from doing that if I stayed. I'll leave you to it. Here's my phone number. If you need me at any time, feel free to call. I handed her a scrap of paper, on which I'd hastily scrawled a number. How about I see myself out? She smiled and looked understanding as I dragged my feet back to the door. Unable to resist saying something, I finished with, I'll stop in tomorrow to see how you're getting on. She smiled and thanked me as if she meant it. As I walked out the front door, I had this mad urge not to go, to stay and just sit in the kitchen while she slept. She had surveillance cameras all over the house and Naveed or someone else nearby keeping watch. There was no need for me to be there. I made myself get into the car again and pull out of the driveway. For a second I thought I saw her silhouetted in the window, but I must have imagined it. Sleep, Caitlin, and stay safe. Please. 55. Waking up in the dark, hurting and cold. My face wet with tears. Screaming for them to let me go until my throat hurt and my voice was almost gone. No one. No reply, no light. Cold. Rough. Hard. Drafty. I was lying on concrete. I didn't know where I was or who they were. Someone else breathing in the dark. Would they hurt me or help me? Who was it? Had I imagined it? Not sure what was worse, cold and hurting alone in the dark, or hot and in pain with some prick hurting me more. It was always dark. And out of the dark came fuck. 56. Blood and bare skin, sand and screaming, struggling in shots. Oh God, Caitlin. My sleep that night was plagued with nightmares about what she'd looked like when I found her, thinking she was dead. That they might get to her again while I wasn't there. I worried that she wouldn't survive the night without me. I just couldn't help myself. My waking thoughts at dawn the next morning were of her. I had to see her. For weeks now, all I'd had to do was open my eyes and turn my head to see that she was okay, but now I didn't know, and it drove me insane. I put it off for as long as I could, then had to drive over to her house. I didn't have second thoughts until I knocked on her door, when I wondered how she'd react to my being there so early. Something told me she wouldn't be civil if I woke her up. I started to wish I'd waited. Somewhere nearby, a child started to practice playing the piano. First the slow plunking as the little fingers learned a new tune, before the monotonous drill of finger exercises. The jerkily played scales jarred with the confusion in my head. Should I stay or should I go? I wasn't sure I could go. I'd sit on the steps and wait until I saw she was safe. I knocked again. Caitlin, it's me. It's Nathan, I called, hoping she'd already be awake and hear me. She took a while to reach the door and even longer to unlock it. When I reached to open it for her, she almost fell. I think she would have if I hadn't been there to stop her. As I tried to hold her up, I could feel her exhaustion. It was as if gravity pulled her to the ground harder than it did me. Then I saw her face, it was positively haggard. I'd only been gone a night and I wished more than ever that I hadn't left. What if they'd managed to get to her while I was gone? She'd almost knocked herself out, falling out her own front door. She was no match for anyone who wanted to hurt her in this condition. What happened? I burst out. I can't sleep, she mumbled, not looking at me. Even in my arms she was swaying and unsteady. The nightmares didn't go away all night. It got so bad that I woke up and was too scared to go back to sleep again. I tried to write them down, but that only made it worse. I just have to get used to sleeping alone, in my own bed and at home again. This was my fault. I should never have left. Come on, I'll take you to bed and make sure you sleep this time. She was too exhausted to refuse. Her arms wearily resting on my neck, I lifted her up. It felt like the most natural thing in the world to have her in my arms again, instead of one of the stranger things I've ever done. Nothing I do with Caitlin is normal, I reflected as I re-entered her house. Tell me where to go, I said softly. She pointed vaguely. Her hand looked too heavy for her wrist to lift. My room's down the hallway. On the left. It was an old house with wide hallways, so I didn't have to walk sideways to keep her feet or head from hitting the walls. Shouldering my way into her room, I headed straight for the big bed. I laid Caitlin carefully on it. She grabbed my hand as I tried to straighten up, pulling me close again. Stay. Please, she said. Sure, I replied, freeing my hand and sitting cautiously on her desk chair. I watched as she smiled and her eyes slowly shut, slipping back into sleep. A blinking blue light attracted my attention and I turned toward the desk, where Alana's old laptop sat. With a glance at Caitlin, I lifted the laptop lid and watched the screen light up, the blinding white of a Word document drawing my eyes. Caitlin was definitely asleep, for she didn't stir at the sudden increase in light levels, so I scrolled through some of the document. She'd been writing down her nightmares and it looked like she'd spent most of the night doing it. I started to skim through what she'd written. Most of it was just adding details to what I'd typed in for her, but I stopped dead when I came across something she'd never told me. This I read slowly, trying to commit every word to memory. I lost track of the days, the difference between day and night, and any sense of time. Some minutes stretched for hours when I just wanted it to be over, but it felt like I'd only just gone to sleep when someone else would hurt me and wake me up to start all over again. I was always tired. Maybe the pain or the horror of it made me so sleepy. Sometimes I was even too tired to fight, too tired to spit the insults at them that I was thinking. Maybe they hurt me less because they didn't get much of a reaction to whatever they did to me. Maybe they hurt me more to get a reaction. There were 4 of them who hurt me, all different. One of them was there more often, a big bully who'd crush me under his weight. He was rough and strong, and he probably left bruises wherever he touched me. He'd hit me or hurt me some other way with his big, meaty hands until I'd at least whimper, before he'd start grunting his way to a climax. He was the one the others called Mike. The bastard who drugged me in the car. This was what I needed, what she hadn't told me or the police. Details about what they did to her, hurting her. My mouth went dry as I started to see what she'd been subjected to, the horrifying view through her eyes in the dark. Another one liked to break my fingers, or twist the ones he'd already broken. He liked to pinch and slap too. He was a small, skinny bloke with a nasal, whiny voice. Torture with him couldn't have lasted more than 5 minutes. I heard Mike say to him once, "Come on Pete, your 5 minutes are almost done," and thankfully Pete had been done too. One of them always brought one of the others along to hold me still. He took forever and his hands were everywhere. It was like being groped by 2 squids. He'd make comments to himself or the guy holding me for him. I know I fell asleep more than once and I doubt he noticed. If Mike was holding me, he'd hit me till I woke up and he'd laugh that he and the other guys had exhausted me before it was Simon's turn. The cold fish was called Simon. Simon's preferred accomplice he called Tom. Tom didn't say much, he just did what he came for and left. I asked him once why he bothered with me at all. He told me to shut up or he'd break my jaw. Don't remember if he came back after that. Then there was her. The woman who wanted me to speak to her friend. The woman who drove the red Mercedes. She hit me and pushed me in and she knew what they'd do to me. I'll kill her if I can. Caitlin's scream was so loud it rattled the window glass. I'd been too intent on her written nightmares to realize she was trapped in a real one and needed my help. I turned, knocking something pink off the desk as I did so. I reached to pick up the nail file from the carpet, dropping it back on the desk. Caitlin cried out again, jerking me into urgency. I slammed the laptop shut, twisting out of the desk chair to stand up. "Wake up, Angel. It's another nightmare and I'm here. You're home, you're safe." The next scream was longer and louder, drowning out my voice. I knelt on the end of her bed. "Caitlin, it's okay, you're safe." She started swaying, loud and panicky. I did a bit of swaying of my own, though not as loud, as I crawled across the bed to be closer to her. I started with the reassuring litany again. "Let me go, you bastard," she screamed at me. I reached out and lightly patted her cheek. Caitlin went berserk, her hands claws that homed in on my face. Arms and legs flying, screaming like nothing human. I thought she was having a fit. I scrambled off her bed and into a half-crouch on the floor, out of her reach. She let out an agonized wail as her hands clutched at the pillow beside her. It took me a moment to realize she was saying my name. I wished for the narrow hospital bed now as I climbed back onto hers so I could reach her. "I'm here, Angel, like I promised. It's okay." Hesitant, I touched my fingers to the hand closer to me, her nails digging into the pillowcase. When she didn't turn the nails on me, I slid my other hand under hers, lifting it between mine. "I'm here," I said. Her eyes were open and dark with tears. She attempted a smile. "You stayed?" She said it like she didn't believe it, pulling her hand away to wipe her eyes. I smiled. Of course I did. I said I would. I shifted and spread out, so my head was on the scrunched-up pillow she tried to strangle. I turned my face toward her. "Bad dream?" Caitlin nodded, her eyes not leaving mine. She looked so vulnerable and lost. I made the offer without thinking. "Come here." I stretched out my arms. She stared at me a moment, but she was already moving closer to me. She cuddled up to my side, her wet cheek against my chest as my arms closed around her. I wanted to kiss her too, but I fought the urge. Being in bed with Caitlin was crazy enough. 57. I woke up when the afternoon sun slanted through Caitlin's window. A lance of light that stabbed me squarely in the eye. I stretched and realized that the warm weight beside me was breathing, as Caitlin let out a little sigh and shifted against my side. I still had one arm around her, and I was bloody careful not to move, so as not to disturb her anymore. I wasn't the only one short on sleep, and she needed it more than me. Caitlin was still a long way from well. She'd asked me to stay as close as I could in case the nightmares came back. I didn't doubt they would, but for now she was okay. My heart lifted with the thought that I'd been able to help, my colossal car fuck-up of yesterday forgotten. I looked down the length of her body, modestly clad in pajamas with long sleeves. One ankle was bare and I could see the pink scar slicing across it. I remembered how sticky the rope had been as I'd sawn through it, how I'd had to peel it from the wound to free her. I swallowed, trying not to think about it. I shifted my gaze further up to the fingers of her right hand, splayed across my chest. The nails were curved crescent moons, carefully shaped since Caitlin's fingers had been freed. I could still feel how the jagged edges had cut into my palms when I'd kissed her hands only 3 days ago. She moved her arm further across me, her sleeve catching on my shirt and revealing the red gouge across her wrist. This scar was darker than the ones on her ankles, and with good reason. The rope around her wrists had been so slick with blood it had felt more like licorice than nylon. It had stuck to the scissors and they'd squeaked as I fought to free her, only to find that the rope was the least of the hurts to her hands. Her middle finger was still slightly crooked and might never be straight again, but at least the broken bones had healed somewhat. They'd healed enough for her to start documenting her own horrifying story. I lifted my head to look at the laptop, to check if I'd closed it so she wouldn't know how I'd spied on her. I thought of emailing the whole account to myself, so I could check it for important info to use for work, but I hesitated. I wanted more than the scant outline she'd sketched out so far. I wanted everything she remembered. Caitlin's breathing changed, the evenness broken by a long inhalation, before it was blown slowly out again. Awakening. Emails and other such violations of her trust could wait. "So, what would you like for breakfast?" I asked after I watched her blink, yawn and finally smile. Caitlin asked sleepily. "Breakfast? Isn't it afternoon?" She sat up and stretched, so I carefully looked away. She wasn't my angel and never would be. The clock said it was 3:16. "Late lunch then?" I hazarded. "Or early dinner," she agreed. "Shall I go have a look at what you have in the fridge?" I asked. Caitlin's brows dipped. "I wouldn't." I stared at her. "Why not?" Her voice died to a whisper. "My fridge has fur." I laughed and stood up, holding out a hand to help her to her feet. "Show me this furry fridge." I kept a supportive arm around her waist as we headed down the passage to the kitchen. Caitlin pulled away from me when we reached the kitchen table, sinking into a chair as far from the fridge as she could. I stopped as she did, raising my eyebrows. "I don't need to smell it and I can't do anything about it." "Not like this," she said. She waved her hands up and down her body. "Is it really that bad?" I asked. Her eyes were huge and heartbreaking. "Everything's been there since the day I went away." Went away. What a fucking understatement. I couldn't look away from her face. "For more than 2 months?" She nodded, resigned. "That long?" "Be my guest," she replied, gesturing toward the fridge. I sucked in a breath and held it before opening the door. It didn't help. I swear her fridge smelled like blue cheese. A lot of blue cheese. The milk was green. The crisper was black and white with fur, interspersed with streaks of red, like there was a dead cat squeezed into it. The shelves looked like there were rainbow-colored guinea pigs asleep on them, some of them in plastic boxes. Only the orange juice looked normal. I reached for the bottle. "Don't," said Caitlin. "I poured a cup yesterday from the other bottle and it came out in chunks. That one's older." I slammed the fridge shut and leaned back against it. The smell lingered, but the worst of it stayed sealed inside. "So what do you want to do about it?" Caitlin shrugged. "I don't know." I was at a loss. "Our cleaner just does the bathrooms, the floors and the dusting." "Not the fridge," Caitlin continued. "Cleaner?" I asked, feeling like an idiot for not thinking of it. "A cleaner. A woman Dad pays to come clean the house once a fortnight so I don't have to, and he doesn't need to worry about it," Caitlin said patiently. "But she doesn't do the fridge and it looks like there are dead mice in there, so I think we'd need the sort of cleaner who does nasty stuff like deal with dead bodies." I looked at her. "I think I have a friend who does industrial cleaning. Let me call him and see if he can help." I patted my pockets and realized I'd left my phone in Caitlin's bedroom. "Do you mind if I go get my phone out of your room? Will you be okay here by yourself?" She gave a weak grin. "Go for it. I'll be fine unless the dead mice have mutated into zombies." Zombies? Oh God, not zombies. I fucking hated zombies now. I forced a smile and strode back to her bedroom. I rang Naveed. "No sign of anyone watching her house," he reported by way of greeting. "Looks like domestic bliss, the two of you in the kitchen. What's for dinner?" "The surveillance cameras." Shit, he was on watch. I hoped they hadn't put a camera in her bedroom. She deserved some privacy. I smiled and kept my voice low. "Zombie mice." "Fuck. What the hell?" "She has a fridge full of fur from the food that's gone bad while she was away. Can you send in a team to deal with it?" I asked, crossing my fingers. "Mate, ASIO cleanup crews aren't for ordinary house cleaning. That's misuse of government resources," Naveed complained. "It'll be me doing it on work time if you don't send them in," I replied. "My job is to protect the valuable witness. That includes making sure she doesn't get sick from eating food from a fridge full of zombie mice." "Fuck," he swore. "Okay, I'll send them in. Get her out unless you want to tell her who you work for." I smiled for the surveillance camera. I knew he was watching. Fuck that. I'll take her food shopping. Make sure it's clean and the team are out by the time we get back. I ended the call. There was no point in saying goodbye when he was in a van down the street, watching our every move on the screens. I headed back to Caitlin, who hadn't moved from her seat. Her eyes were questioning, though she didn't say a word. "My friend can spare a cleaning team in about an hour, but it's probably best if we go out. Leave them to deal with the dead bodies so you can come home to a clean fridge. We can do your food shopping so you can fill it up again." "Do I have time to get dressed?" she asked. I smiled. "Sure, if you're quick." 58. "I want a shower," she said softly, looking up at me. "So take one," I answered. Caitlin looked embarrassed. I can't. I tried last night but I almost passed out. I can't stand up that long." Shit. It was on the tip of my tongue to offer to help her in the shower, but I couldn't think of any way to say it that didn't sound dirty. Not that I wouldn't take a shower with Caitlin if she was offering, it was just that she wasn't. I wondered how she'd managed in hospital on the few occasions this week once the dressings were off, before I remembered. I pointed outside through the sliding door. "How about I stick one of those plastic chairs in the shower for you to sit on?" Caitlin smiled, looking relieved. "That could work." I fumbled with the lock until I managed to open the door, and lifted up a cobwebbed chair. I hosed off the inevitable redback spider with her puzzle web under the seat, before I carried the damp chair into the shower for Caitlin. She'd followed me slowly to the bathroom, so I faced her for a moment, not sure what to say. "Thank you," she said after a while, lifting the hem of her shirt a little so I could see her tummy. "Could you shut the door behind you? I like my showers steamy." "Oh God. Talk about dirty." "Sure. I'll go wait in the lounge room," I replied hastily, stumbling out of the bathroom as quickly as I could. I turned on the TV and sat in the lounge room, not even noticing what was on the screen. In my head, all I saw was Caitlin in the shower, steam curling around her as the water cascaded. I heard her quick footsteps tripping across the carpet, and turned in time to see Caitlin disappear into the kitchen. I stood and followed. I found her leaning against the fridge door, her arms, hands and head in the freezer. I reached for the freezer door, opening it wider so I could see what she was doing. Caitlin pressed herself against the fridge, squashing skin against steel as I realized what I was looking at. "Shit, sorry," I said, turning my back and trying to get the image out of my head. Fat chance of that. Burned into my retinas was Caitlin, wearing nothing but a pair of pants, her breasts pressed against the fridge door as she pushed her hands as deep into the freezer as she could reach, her face pale with pain. Oh shit, the surveillance cameras. Even if I had my eyes closed, Naveed was watching the screens, recording everything. Caitlin didn't deserve to be stared at like this, not even for her own safety. I pulled my shirt over my head and held it out behind me. "Please put this on. Let me help you." Cold, damp fingers touched mine as she took the shirt. I heard the fabric slide over her hair, her skin, covering her from the cameras I couldn't tell her about. "Are you decent?" I asked. Caitlin sounded like she was trying not to laugh. "Yes." I dared to turn around. My shirt came to her knees, so wide you could have fitted two of her in it. I lifted my eyes to her face. "What's wrong?" She held out her hands, looking lost. I can't fasten things. Buttons and things. My fingers won't work." Ice helps dull the pain. I looked at my too large shirt. "So wear a t-shirt. There's nothing wrong with looking casual. We're only going to a supermarket." I smiled gently. "You'll still look beautiful." I regretted my words the instant she turned red and looked at the floor. "I don't have a problem with my t-shirts. I can't fasten my bra." Fuck. Now it was my turn to blush in embarrassment. I should have seen that one coming. "I can help you with that," I replied reluctantly. "That would be really great," Caitlin said. She hesitated, as if there was more she wanted to say, biting her lip until she continued, "But, could you please turn around and close your eyes while I get dressed? I'll tell you when I need you." I nodded. Would it have been necessary to ask anyone else not to watch? Or just me, the pervert who wouldn't look away while she dressed herself in hospital yesterday? Of course.